14 months after I buried my wife, my daughter stood at my door with tears running down her face. "Dad, I only have you left," she whispered. I let her whole family move in. 3 months later, I was pushed into a tiny room beside the garage. At a black tie gala, my daughter glanced at my wife's old sweater and said in front of everyone, "You're making this awkward, Dad. You embarrass us." I stayed silent. But that night, I heard something even colder. This story is about betrayal, patience, and protecting what matters most. Quick pause before we start. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever needed to protect something precious from someone close to you? I genuinely read everyone. A quick note, certain details are fictionalized for storytelling and learning. The heart of the story. The message is what I hope stays with you. They said she just mixed plants together as if 20 years of biochemical research could be dismissed with a cocktail party smile and a wave of the hand. They said it like Ida was some kind of kitchen hobbyist grinding herbs into paste while watching afternoon television. They had no idea who she really was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, 14 months after I buried my wife. I sat alone at my kitchen table that October morning in 2023, the pale light coming through the window over the sink, making everything look tired and old. I am 60 years old, silver-threaded hair hands that once pipetted compounds worth millions during 32 years in pharmaceutical research, now holding the only thing that mattered anymore. Before me lay Ida's notebook, 312 pages, blue ink, numbered in her precise hand. 2 decades of hospice observations translated into biochemical compounds designed to ease terminal cancer pain. Ida Barnes, who would have turned 59 this past August, left behind this notebook representing work she conducted between volunteer shifts at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. She wasn't an ordinary housewife. She held a biochemistry degree from UMass Amherst. She understood molecular structures the way poets understand meter, and for 20 years, while I worked in corporate laboratories, developing compounds that would be patented and sold and credited to men in corner offices, Ida worked in hospice rooms with dying patients who told her exactly where it hurt, and how much and what kind of pain couldn't be described in the surveys doctors handed them on clipboards. I opened to page 1. Her inscription dated March 2003 read, "For the ones who hurt quietly and alone, you deserve better." The notebook was the only true thing left of our 34 years together. The house in Brookline still had her coffee mugs and her reading glasses and her gray wool sweater hanging in the closet. But those were objects. This notebook was her mind, her purpose, her stubborn refusal to accept that suffering was simply the cost of dying. She used to say the formula would outlive us both. She was right. She just didn't know it would become a battleground. I turned to page 47, where she documented a pancreatic cancer patient named Eleanor, who described her pain as glass shards turning inside. Ida had spent 6 weeks adjusting compound ratios, testing absorption rates, documenting relief duration. Eleanor lived another 4 months. 4 months of reduced pain. 4 months of holding her granddaughter's hand without wincing. 4 months that mattered. Before I tell you what I did before, I explain how I took back everything they tried to steal, I need you to understand who Ida really was. Not the woman they would later dismiss, not the formula they would try to patent under someone else's name, but the biochemist who sat with the dying and refused to look away. I was still sitting there at 7:43 that Monday morning when the doorbell rang. 2 short rings, 1 long, Vivica's signature. I opened the door to find my daughter standing on the front step beside a rented moving truck. 14 cardboard boxes stacked on the sidewalk behind her. Vivica Barnes, 35, arrived with rented boxes and desperation in her eyes. Her marketing career ended with her husband's collapsed biotech startup. Her mascara had run. She'd been crying in the car. "I only have you left, Dad," she said, and I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Beside her stood Stellan Lockwood, 38, shaking my hand with the confident grip of a man accustomed to closing deals, not the gratitude of family seeking help. His smile never quite reached his eyes. His startup? Something about pharmaceutical distribution. Logistics had gone under 3 weeks prior. At least that's what Vivica told me. Stellan himself said very little, just, "We appreciate this," and "We'll be out in a few weeks, just until we find our feet." Behind them stood my grandchildren. Brady Lockwood, 16, carried boxes with his headphones on, lanky and quiet, watching everything, with eyes older than his age suggested. And Marigold Lockwood, 13, clutched a worn teddy bear under the October wind, her eyes still red from whatever tears had been shed that morning in whatever place they'd left behind. "Is Grandma Ida still here?" Grandpa Marigold asked, looking past me into the hallway, as if her grandmother might appear with cookies and questions about school. I knelt down so we were at eye level. "She's not here anymore, sweetheart, but everything she loved is still here." Marigold nodded solemnly, clutching that teddy bear tighter. I couldn't refuse them, not with Marigold's red-rimmed eyes looking up at me, not with Vivica's hand trembling as she gripped her purse strap, not with 14 boxes containing everything a family of 4 owned, sitting on my front walkway in the cold morning air. So I stepped aside and said, what any father would say, "Come inside, we'll figure it out." Vivica hugged me, whispering "thank you" into my shoulder. Brady hauled boxes. Stellan directed traffic with the efficiency of someone who'd managed teams and budgets and quarterly projections. I led Marigold inside, showing her the guest room upstairs that still had Vivica's old bookshelf and desk from high school. In the hallway passing the large mirror that had hung there since Ida picked it out in 1998, Stellan paused. I was ahead of him, talking to Marigold about where to put her backpack. I didn't see him reach behind the mirror's frame. I didn't see the small device, thumb-sized and black, that he pressed into the gap between the mirror's back and the wall. Swift. Practiced. Like a well-rehearsed routine. He caught up to us seconds later, carrying a box labeled "Kitchen" in blue marker. By noon, all 14 boxes were inside. By evening, Stellan was asking about the garage space for storage. By the time I went to bed that night, my house felt different. Fuller, louder, less mine. I closed the front door behind us all that morning. 14 boxes in my hallway, 4 extra people in my house, and one small thing behind the mirror in my entryway that I wouldn't discover for another 4 months, a device that would record everything, Stream, everything, and ultimately become the very evidence that would destroy the man who planted it. But that October morning, I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew I had a family to take care of and a notebook to protect. How long does it take to erase a person from their own home to make them a guest in rooms they've lived in for 40 years? 3 months? That's the answer. 3 months after I closed the door on that October morning, with 14 boxes in my hallway and 4 extra people in my house, the erasure was complete. I walked through my darkened home that Wednesday night in January 2024, cataloging what had been taken. Not stolen that would come later, but taken nonetheless. Room by room, space by space, memory by memory. Ida's study, where she'd spent 2 decades translating hospice observations into biochemical formulas, had become Brady's gaming room. Her antique research desk, the one she'd found at an estate sale in 1997 and refinished herself, was gone. Replaced by 3 LED monitors arranged in a semicircle casting blue light across walls that used to hold her framed UMass Amherst diploma and her collection of botanical reference books. The books were in boxes somewhere. The diploma was in the basement. The desk was at Goodwill. "We thought Brady needed a proper space to focus," Vivica had explained when she supervised the removal. "You weren't using it for anything anyway, Dad." The kitchen had been rearranged for what Stellan called logical workflow. Ida's collection of labeled herbal jars, 20 years of careful cultivation, drying and documentation had been thrown out as a fire hazard. The spice rack she'd organized alphabetically was now organized by frequency of use. Her handwritten recipe cards, including the one for the molasses cookies she made every Christmas, were filed away somewhere I couldn't find them. "We're just trying to help you organize things more efficiently, Dad," Vivica said, rearranging my late wife's kitchen, while I stood there holding a jar of dried lavender that had somehow survived the purge. But the master bedroom was the final insult. The room Ida and I had shared for 34 years, where she'd read research papers in bed with her reading glasses perched on her nose, where we'd talked through compound variations at 2 in the morning, because she'd had an idea she couldn't let go. That room now belonged to Vivica and Stellan. The stairs, Dad. The stairs to our old room are just too much for your knees. Vivica had said, her hand on my shoulder, her voice dripping with concern that almost sounded genuine. "We're worried about you falling. You understand, right?" I understood. I understood that I climbed those same stairs every single day without trouble. I understood that I was being moved to the smallest room beside the garage, the one we'd used for storage, the one with the single window that looked out at the fence. I understood everything. By January, I had become a tenant in my own home. That Wednesday night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I walked the hallway one more time, past Ida's former study with its gaming monitors still glowing, past the kitchen where someone else's organizational system had replaced hers, past the master bedroom door. I stopped outside that door. Inside, I could hear Stellan's voice low and distinct. He was on the phone. The wall was thin enough that his words carried clearly into the hallway where I stood in darkness. "The notebook," he said. "I need to know exactly where he keeps it." I stood there for a long time after the call ended. Then I went to my small room, beside the garage, sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and made a decision. The next morning before 6 o'clock, before anyone else in the house had woken, I sat in that garage room under the only lamp lit in the sleeping house. The sun hadn't risen yet. The street outside was silent. And I need to tell you something about who I really am. They saw what they wanted to see: a grieving widower, a retired man who'd lost his wife and didn't know what to do with himself, someone easy to move around, easy to reorganize, easy to occupy. What they didn't know was this: I wasn't just a retired engineer. I was a biochemical engineer who'd spent 32 years in pharmaceutical research, working with compounds and patents and formulations worth millions of dollars. I'd worked for 3 major pharmaceutical companies. I'd published 17 papers. I understood intellectual property law better than most attorneys because I'd had to defend my own work in patent disputes twice. Ida always said I was the kind of man who reads everything before signing. She was right. I read contracts, I read financial statements, I read people. And I knew Gerald Ramsey, not as Vivica's investor or Stellan's potential partner or whatever story they were telling themselves. I knew him as the CEO I'd whistleblown in 1999 for research plagiarism. He'd taken credit for a diabetes compound developed by a junior researcher named Sarah Brennan, filed the patent under his own name, and tried to bury her objections with a settlement and an NDA. I was the senior engineer who documented everything and sent it to the board. Gerald Ramsey lost his license for 18 months, lost 3 research partnerships, lost his position at the company, and spent the next 2 decades rebuilding his reputation with Biomedica Pharmaceuticals. He remembered me. I was certain of that. What Vivica and Stellan didn't know, what they never thought to ask, was that I held a $22 million stock portfolio managed through an LLC that Ida and I had established in 2001. I was heavily positioned against Biomedica Pharmaceuticals, a bet I'd placed 5 years ago when I noticed certain patterns in their clinical trial, reporting that reminded me of Gerald's old methods. And most critically, the thing they didn't know, Ida and I had filed Patent US 102345567 jointly in 2019, granted in 2020, a comprehensive biochemical formula for palliative pain management derived from botanical compounds with specific molecular structures and absorption mechanisms documented across 97 pages of technical specifications. The original patent certificate sat in a safety deposit box at Boston Private Bank. My attorney Otis Bryant held the second key. You need to understand something: I wasn't weak. I was patient. There's a difference. For 3 months, I'd watched them occupy my home. I'd watched them erase Ida's presence room by room. I'd said nothing because I was waiting to see what they really wanted, waiting to understand the scope of what they were planning. Last night, Stellan had finally shown his hand. The notebook. I need to know exactly where he keeps it. The difference between us and them was simple. They were playing checkers. I had been playing chess for 34 years. And last night, someone finally made the move that started the game. This morning, before anyone else woke up, I was going to a store to buy a very particular kind of camera. I bought the camera that Thursday morning, a small wireless security camera with motion detection and cloud backup, the kind marketed for parents monitoring babysitters or businesses tracking inventory. It took me 45 minutes to position it in the garage room where the angle captured my desk, the door, and anyone who entered. I mounted it inside an old dictionary on the shelf, Webster's Unabridged 3rd edition, the one with the hollowed-out center that Ida had made as a joke anniversary gift years ago, because I always said she was my favorite definition of home. 3 weeks later, on a Friday morning in February 2024, I opened my desk drawer to retrieve the notebook for my weekly review. The drawer was empty. No forced entry, no scattered papers, no sign of disturbance. Just the clean absence where Ida's notebook had rested for 14 months. The space where it had sat every single day since I brought it home from the safety deposit box after her funeral. 312 pages of her handwriting, her observations, her compounds, her legacy gone. I stood there looking at that empty drawer for maybe 10 seconds. Not long, long enough to register the theft, long enough to note the precision of it, long enough to understand exactly what I was dealing with. 90 seconds later, Vivica appeared at the garage room door. "Dad," she said, slightly breathless, blinking rapidly. "Is everything okay? You look upset." I turned to face my daughter. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. Her hair was in a messy bun. She looked like she'd just woken up, except her eyes were too alert, too focused. "Just looking for something," I said calmly. "Looking for what?" She stepped into the room, her eyes darting left, right, anywhere but directly at me. "I can help you look for it. You know how things get misplaced sometimes." "Thank you, honey," I said, closing the drawer. "No need." She hovered there for another moment, her hands clasped in front of her, her weight shifting from foot to foot. Then she nodded and backed out of the doorway, closing the door behind her with a soft click. I sat down at my desk. No panic, no alarm. Instead, I opened my laptop, not to search for the notebook, but to access the security camera feed I'd installed 3 weeks ago. Immediately after I'd overheard Stellan through the wall saying those 5 words, "The notebook. I need to know exactly where he keeps it." The camera had been recording everything since then. Motion activated. Cloud backup every 6 hours. I opened the app and pressed rewind. The footage scrolled backward at 4 times speed, my empty garage room in reverse, hours compressing into minutes, the light under the door changing from dark to pale as night became morning. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the light shifted. I slowed the playback to normal speed. I sat very still for a moment, watching the timestamp tick forward. This was it. This was the moment I would see exactly who I was dealing with. The door opened. Stellan entered wearing dark clothing, holding something thin and metallic in his hand. A lock-picking tool. He moved directly to my desk without hesitation, like someone who'd rehearsed this route. He opened the drawer in my locked drawer in under 20 seconds. He removed the notebook. For the next 23 minutes, I watched my son-in-law photograph every single page of my late wife's research. He held each page under my desk, lamps glow, positioned his phone carefully to avoid shadows, took multiple shots of pages with diagrams or complex formulas, methodical, professional, like someone who'd done this before. When he finished, he carefully placed the notebook back in the drawer, closed it, tested the lock, and stood there for a moment, making sure everything looked exactly as he'd found it. Then he turned toward the door. And that's when I saw it. In the upper corner of my camera's frame, the garage room had a small window that faced the hallway. In the faint reflection of that window glass, I could see Stellan pause in the hallway after leaving my room. He reached toward the large mirror, the one that had hung there since Ida picked it out in 1998, the one I walked past every single day. He reached behind it, adjusted something. Something small and dark pressed into the gap between the mirror's back and the wall. I magnified the frame as much as the resolution would allow. A thumb-sized device, black plastic, small lens visible at one end, a surveillance camera. Stellan had been monitoring my hallway and any room visible from that angle since move-in day 4 months ago. Since October, since the very first day he'd arrived with those 14 boxes and that rented truck and Marigold clutching her teddy bear. I sat back in my chair. You need to understand what that small device behind the mirror meant. It wasn't just evidence of invasion of privacy. It wasn't just proof of bad faith. That device was a violation of the Federal Wiretap Act Title 18 United States Code, Section 2511, interception of oral or wire communications without consent, a federal felony carrying up to 5 years in prison. Stellan hadn't just stolen Ida's research. He'd committed a federal crime that I could now prove with video evidence showing him placing the device himself. I saved the footage to 3 separate encrypted drives. I labeled them carefully with dates and timestamps. I documented everything in a text file, the camera model I'd used, the installation date, the chain of custody for the footage, the exact timestamp of Stellan's entry and exit. I wrote it like the research documentation I'd prepared for 32 years in pharmaceutical laboratories, clear, precise, defensible. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 6 months. Otis Bryant answered on the second ring. "Danny," he said, surprised. Otis was the only person who still called me, that a nickname from graduate school that had stuck through decades. "It's been months." "I know," I said. My voice was steady, calm. the way it always got when I'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. Otis, I need you to clear your calendar for the next few weeks, and I need you to pull out the patent file, the one Ida and I filed in 2019. It's time to use it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that means a man is recalculating everything he thought he knew. Otis called me back exactly 1 week later. I was sitting in my car in the Stop and Shop parking lot Tuesday afternoon in late February, watching people push shopping carts through the cold. My phone rang with his number. "Danny?" He said, his voice careful, and measured in a way that meant he'd found something significant. "Do you remember a man named Gerald Ramsey?" I sat very still. 25 years collapsed into the distance between my hand on the steering wheel and my daughter's house, where I no longer had a bedroom of my own. "Gerald Ramsey," I said slowly, "CEO of Biomedica Pharmaceuticals. I cost him 18 months and 3 partnerships in 1999. He's your investor," Otis said. "Not Vivica's, yours. Or rather, he's the one funding this entire operation." I watched a woman in a blue coat struggle with a shopping cart that had a stuck wheel. She abandoned it and went back inside for another one. "Walk me through it," I said. Otis had chosen to make this call from a parking lot on his end, too. He'd told me that, deliberately knowing there was a camera behind my hallway mirror that might be recording. He was being careful. Careful meant the news was worse than I'd expected. The investment chain goes through a Delaware shell company called Meridian Holdings, LLC, which is controlled by a Cayman Islands entity called Pacific Ventures Group. Pacific Ventures' ultimate controlling shareholder, once you dig through the layers, is Gerald Ramsey, 63 years old, CEO of Biomedica for the last 12 years, net worth estimated at $47 million. "And he didn't approach Vivica out of faith in the product," I said. "No." Otis paused. "Danny, I made some calls, discreet ones. Gerald recognized Ida's formula the moment Stellan sent him those stolen photographs. This is the exact research Gerald tried to plagiarize in 1999, the work you exposed him for." I closed my eyes. The woman with the blue coat came back out with a working cart. "You need to understand what it means when someone waits 25 years for revenge. They don't forget. They don't move on. They plan. They watch. They wait for the exact right moment when you're vulnerable enough that the knife will go in clean." "Gerald isn't investing," Otis continued. "He's using your daughter and her husband as pawns to seize what he couldn't take 25 years ago. If this product launches and anything goes wrong, FDA violations, health complaints, patent disputes, Vivica and Stellan will be the ones whose names are on every document. Gerald stays hidden behind shell companies and Cayman Islands accounts. They shoulder all the legal risk while he profits. And if nothing goes wrong," I asked, though I already knew the answer, "he still wins. He gets Ida's research under a different name, distributed through a company he controls, generating revenue he can siphon through those offshore entities. Either way, he wins and your family loses." I sat there in the Stop and Shop parking lot, engine off heat, slowly draining from the car, watching my breath start to fog the windshield. "Danny," Otis said slowly, "Gerald isn't just after the formula. He's after you. This is personal for him." "Good," I said, watching a woman push a shopping cart past my window. "It's personal for me, too." 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in early March, Vivica and Stellan called a family meeting. They spread documents across the dining table, the table where Ida and I had eaten breakfast for 34 years, where she'd graded her biochemistry homework in 1985, where we'd celebrated Vivica's pharmacy school acceptance in 2012. Vivica was practically glowing. She placed a color photocopy in front of me with the careful reverence of someone handling something precious. "It's Mom's work, Dad," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Isn't that beautiful? We're bringing her legacy to market." I looked down at the photocopy. The page was covered in Ida's handwriting, her neat, precise documentation style that I'd know anywhere. Chemical formulas, dosage calculations, observation notes, nature path, pain relief, oil. Stellan said, using his confident pitch voice, the one I'd heard him use on phone calls when he thought no one was listening. "The investor believes this could help thousands of terminal patients manage pain naturally. We've got capital commitments, a distribution partnership with 3 Northeast pharmacy chains, and preliminary interest from 2 hospice care networks." Vivica squeezed my hand. "We're going to make sure everyone knows it was Mom's work. Her name will be on everything." I looked down at the photocopy again. top left corner, page number 17D. That was Ida's notation system for trial batches. The letter indicated the year D meant 2013. The number indicated the sequence. And underneath the page number, barely visible in the photocopy grain, was a tiny inverted triangle drawn in pencil. I stopped breathing for a moment. The inverted triangle was Ida's private code, a symbol she'd use in her notebooks to mark formulas that had been tested and rejected. It meant void, canceled, do not use. I remembered this batch. Ida had developed it in 2013, excited because the initial results were promising effective pain relief for the first 3 days. But by day 7, the test subjects reported mild skin irritation at the application site. By day 10, liver function tests showed slight elevations in enzyme levels. Nothing catastrophic, nothing life-threatening, but enough that Ida had immediately discarded the formula and started over. The complete finalized safe version, the one that took her 3 more years to perfect, was the one we'd filed in the patent, the one that sat in the bank vault with Otis holding the second key. They'd stolen a poison disguised as medicine, and they had no idea. I looked at the inverted triangle in the corner, Ida's quiet handwriting still visible under the photocopy grain, a warning from beyond the grave that only I could read. "Wonderful," I said, setting the photocopy down gently. My voice was steady, calm. "You've worked so hard on this. You're not upset that we're using Mom's formula?" Vivica asked, searching my face. "No," I said, and I meant it. "It's very beautiful." What I didn't say was this Ida had warned them 10 years ago when she drew that triangle, but only I could decode it, and I wasn't going to tell them not yet. I kept my silence about the flawed formula for 3 days. 3 days of watching Vivica and Stellan make phone calls and send emails and talk excitedly about distribution, partnerships, and profit margins. 3 days of carrying Ida's warning in my chest like a stone I couldn't set down. Then Marigold found me. It was Saturday afternoon, same week. I was reading in the living room trying to focus on a book about pharmaceutical patent law that I'd read twice before but couldn't seem to absorb this time. The pale sunlight came through the window, making the dust motes visible in the air, making my 13-year-old granddaughter look younger than her years when she appeared in the doorway holding a piece of paper. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "can I show you something?" I set the book down. "Of course." She came over and sat on the floor beside my chair, the way she used to when she was smaller, and I had read to her. She was holding a colored pencil drawing on white paper, the kind they give kids in art class. The drawing showed an old man sitting by a window holding a teacup. The detail was remarkable for a 13-year-old. She'd captured the way light falls across a face, the way hands hold something precious carefully. Behind the old man, drawn in fainter lines, was the silhouette of a woman standing with one hand on the chair's back. Underneath, in Marigold's neat print, she'd written, "Do you think Grandma Ida can still see us? Grandpa Speepoff. Kedipop restore spo." I looked at that drawing for a long time, at the woman's silhouette behind the chair, at the careful way Marigold had shaded the old man's face to show someone who was both sad and not sad at the same time. "This is beautiful," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. "I dream about her sometimes," Marigold said softly. "I know I only met her twice before she got sick, but I remember her voice. It was kind. And in my dreams, she's always standing behind people like she's watching to make sure they're okay." I set the drawing on the side table and got down on the floor with her, my knees protesting but not caring. We sat there together, backs against the couch, looking at her drawing from this new angle. "Your grandmother," I said, choosing my words carefully because children deserve truth, not comfort, wasn't an ordinary woman. And I don't mean that the way most people mean it when they talk about someone who died. Marigold turned to look at me, her brown eyes serious. "I want you to understand something about Ida that I haven't told anyone else. Not because it's secret, but because most people never asked." I told her about the hospice, about how Ida spent 20 years volunteering at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center, sitting beside people who were dying, hundreds of them over 2 decades, people whose families couldn't be there, or who didn't have families, or who just needed someone to hold their hand in the middle of the night when the pain got bad and the nurses were with other patients. And she'd sit there, I said, sometimes for hours, just sitting, sometimes talking if they wanted to talk, sometimes silent if that's what they needed. And she'd take notes afterward, not about them, but about what they told her, about where the pain was, what kind of pain, what time of day it got worse, what helped and what didn't. Marigold listened without interrupting, which is a rare quality in anyone, let alone a 13-year-old. The formula she developed, the one in her notebook, was built from those 20 years. It was her way of making sure that no one had to be in pain during their last hours. That dying could be a little bit gentler. "That's why she made it," Marigold said quietly. It wasn't a question. "That's why she made it." We sat there for a moment in the afternoon light. Then Marigold said something that changed everything. "Dad said Grandma's formula is going to make us really rich." She said, her voice still soft, still innocent. "He said it on the phone a lot. Is that true?" I turned to look at her. "Your dad said that?" "Yeah." She frowned like she was trying to remember something just out of reach. "He talks on the phone about it, about the formula and the company and how much money we're going to make." I kept my voice casual. "Who was he talking to, sweetheart?" "I don't know." She picked at a loose thread on her jeans. "He always goes to the kitchen when he makes those calls. Like, he doesn't want Mom to hear, maybe. But the kitchen shares a wall with my room, so sometimes I can hear him through it. He sounds really happy when he talks about it. Excited." "What else does he say?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I'm not really listening. I'm usually doing homework or drawing. But I hear him say Grandma's name sometimes, and numbers, big numbers." I sat very still watching my 13-year-old granddaughter's face, realizing she'd been collecting puzzle pieces this whole time without knowing she was building evidence. "Does your brother hear these calls too?" I asked. Marigold thought about it. "Maybe Brady's room is on the other side of the house, but he goes downstairs for snacks a lot at night. He might have heard some things." I reached over and pulled her into a side hug. She leaned against me, still holding her drawing. "Thank you for showing me your picture," I said. "And yes, I think your grandma can still see us. I think she's watching to make sure we're all okay, just like in your dreams." "Good," Marigold said, then quieter. "I miss her, even though I barely knew her." "I miss her too." We sat there until Vivica called Marigold for dinner. She took her drawing with her, but the image stayed in my mind, the old man by the window, the woman's silhouette standing guard behind him. That evening after Marigold went to bed, I sat at my desk in the garage room and opened the encrypted log file I'd been keeping since I bought the camera. I added a new entry dated and time-stamped. "Stellan has been making calls from the kitchen away from cameras and family. Topic: Formula Money Company. Brady or Marigold may have heard more than we realize. Follow up carefully. Do not endanger the children." I saved the file, backed it up to 2 separate drives. Marigold had given me more than a drawing that afternoon. She'd given me a witness, and witnesses, I was beginning to understand, were going to be the most valuable currency I had. Witnesses are valuable, documents are valuable, but nothing is quite as valuable as the moment your opponents hand you the evidence of their own contempt. That moment arrived on a Monday morning in mid-March, wrapped in cream-colored paper. The envelope was heavy stock embossed with the Four Seasons Hotel Boston logo in gold, the kind of invitation that announces wealth before you even open it. Vivica appeared at my garage room door, holding it like it was something precious, her face bright with excitement. "Dad," she said, slightly breathless. "It's here, the launch party invitation." I set down the patent documentation I'd been reviewing and took the envelope from her hands. The weight of it, the texture, everything about it screamed money and success and arrival. Inside were 3 pages professionally printed on matching heavy stock. The first page announced the event: Nature Path, Pain Relief. Oil launch reception, Four Seasons, Hotel Boston, 15th floor, ballroom, Friday evening at 7 o'clock. Black tie, optional. The second page listed the guest list: prominent New England physicians, pharmacists, medical investors, names I recognized from industry conferences and pharmaceutical journals, people with money and influence and the power to make or break a product in the New England market. The third page showed the investor's logo, a sleek design I didn't recognize but would later learn belonged to one of Gerald Ramsey's shell companies. And at the bottom, printed in bold total capital, raised $3,200,000 US. $3.2 million. I read all 3 pages carefully. Then I read them again. Not a single mention of Ida's name. Not one line of acknowledgement. Not a credit for 20 years of research conducted in hospice rooms while other people were sleeping. Not a word about the hundreds of dying patients who told her where it hurt, and how much and what kind of relief they needed. Just the product name, the company name, the investor's logo, the money. "It's next Friday, Dad," Vivica said, watching my face. At the Four Seasons, we'd love for you to be there. It would mean so much. I looked up at her, my daughter, 35 years old, standing in the doorway of the smallest room in her childhood home, the room I'd been relegated to after they'd taken everything else. The investor wants to meet you, she added, to thank you for Ida's inspiration. Inspiration. That's what they were calling it, inspiration. I folded the invitation carefully, creasing it along the original fold lines, and set it on my desk. I'll be there, I said. My voice came out measured and calm, but I felt something click into place inside my chest. A decision that couldn't be unmade. Vivica smiled, relieved. Thank you, Dad. It's going to be beautiful. Mom would have loved it. After she left, I sat there looking at that invitation for a long time. You need to understand what that invitation meant. It wasn't just disrespect. It wasn't just oversight. It was erasure. They had taken Ida's legacy, 20 years of sitting beside dying strangers, 20 years of careful documentation, 20 years of refusing to look away from suffering, and they had printed their names on it in gold lettering and called it inspiration. $3.2 million built on work they would never acknowledge. I picked up my phone and called Otis. Wednesday, I said when he answered. 2 o'clock, your office. It's time. Wednesday afternoon, at exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into Otis Bryant's law office on the 22nd floor of 1 Federal Street in downtown Boston. The conference room had dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, ships moving slowly across gray water. The city spread out below us like a game board. Otis was already there, yellow legal pad in front of him, reading glasses perched on his nose. He'd cleared the entire afternoon, told his assistant to hold all calls. I laid everything out on that dark wood table, piece by piece. First patent, US10234567. Ida and I filed it jointly in 2019, granted in 2020. 97 pages of technical specifications for a comprehensive biochemical formula for palliative pain management. The original certificate held by Otis himself in a bank vault downtown. Second, all camera footage. Stellan entering my room at 2:17 a.m., photographing every page of the notebook. Stellan reaching behind the hallway mirror on move-in day, planting the surveillance device. The window reflection showing him adjusting it. Timestamps, metadata, chain of custody documentation. Third, intercepted email chains between Stellan and Gerald, captured by the packet sniffer I'd installed on my home network router. Completely legal. I owned the network, I owned the house, I had every right to monitor traffic passing through my own equipment. Fourth, documentation of my $22 million stock portfolio, including an 8.3% stake in CrossBio Therapeutics Biomedica Pharmaceuticals, primary competitor in the palliative care market. Otis reviewed everything methodically, making notes on his yellow pad in his precise handwriting. When he finished, he looked at me over his glasses. 3 simultaneous strikes, he said. Same morning, give them no time to coordinate a defense. He outlined it. Strike 1 USPTO patent infringement claim against Naturepath. Demand immediate temporary restraining order, halting all product sales. Freeze all revenue. Force them to prove in federal court that their formula doesn't infringe on our patent, which they can't because it's literally photographed from Ida's notebook. Strike 2 FBI report documenting Stellan's Federal Wiretap Act violations. Hidden surveillance device in a private residence without consent. Video evidence showing him planting it. Federal felony carrying up to 5 years in prison. Strike 3 SEC complaint regarding Gerald Ramsey's market manipulation, using internal emails between Stellan and Gerald as evidence of securities fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy to defraud investors. Danny Otis said, setting down his pen. Once we start this, there is no turning back. This isn't a negotiation. This is war. I thought about that invitation sitting on my desk. 3 pages, $3.2 million, 0 words about Ida. I thought about the inverted triangle on page 17D. Ida's warning that only I could read. I thought about Marigold asking if her grandmother could still see us. I know, I said. Before I left, Otis stopped me at the elevator. One more thing, he said. That 8.3% stake you hold in CrossBio Therapeutics Biomedica's main competitor. Have you been adding to it? Every week for 2 months, I said. The elevator doors opened. Otis stood there with an expression I hadn't seen in 30 years of knowing him. It looked like awe. He understood what I'd been building all along, not just a defense, but a siege engine. A siege engine takes time to build. You gather materials, you position pieces, you wait for the exact right moment to release the tension. Otis understood that when he looked at me in that elevator. What he didn't understand yet was that I wasn't building alone. That became clear Thursday night, the night before the gala. Brady came downstairs for water, just after 9 o'clock, the house dark except for the blue glow of Stellan's laptop left open on the coffee table. I know this because Brady told me later, standing in the kitchen while the rest of the house slept, showing me something on his phone that would change everything. But let me tell you how it happened. Brady had been in his room doing homework, headphones on chemistry textbook open, trying to focus on molecular structures while the house settled into its evening routine around him. Vivica in the master bedroom, on a call with someone about catering logistics. Stellan somewhere upstairs, Marigold already asleep. Brady got thirsty, came downstairs in socks and a t-shirt, 16 years old and lanky the way teenage boys are before they grow into their frames. He walked through the dark living room toward the kitchen, and that's when he saw the laptop. Stellan's laptop sitting open on the coffee table, screen bright, email program visible. Brady intended to close it for him. That's what he told me, just close the laptop so the battery wouldn't die. But he stopped when his eyes caught the screen's contents. An email, addressed to someone named Gerald Ramsey. Subject line, Phase 2, proceed without her consent. Brady stood there in the dark reading. The email laid out exact timeline for transferring Vivica's equity stake, 51% of Nature Path Pain Relief LLC, to Gerald's holding company before product launch. Without her knowledge, without her signature, using power of attorney documentation that Stellan had apparently gotten her to sign months ago under different pretenses. Transfer the remaining 51% before she has time to consult anyone in the email read. Once the gala is done and distribution contracts are signed, she'll have no leverage to object. Brady stood in that dark living room, staring at proof that his father was selling his mother's company out from under her. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera app, photographed the laptop screen completely legal as it was displayed openly in plain view in a shared common space with no reasonable expectation of privacy. 3 photos from slightly different angles to ensure the text was readable, saved them to a private album, closed the photo app, slipped the phone back into his pocket, turned toward the stairs. I walked in to get water at that exact moment. We locked eyes in the dark, grandfather and grandson, the blue glow from the laptop casting shadows across his face. Brady, I said quietly, still up. Grandpa. His voice came out very soft. I need to show you something. Marigold had told me Brady heard things through walls. I hadn't expected this. We went to the kitchen. He pulled out his phone, handed it to me without a word. I looked at the screen, read the email once, read it again. Zoomed in on the specific phrases that would matter in court. You need to understand what that photograph meant. It wasn't just evidence of fraud. It wasn't just proof of theft. It was proof that Stellan had been willing to destroy his own wife, my daughter, to save himself, to enrich himself, to secure his position with Gerald while leaving Vivica holding an empty bag and a company that would be worth nothing once the patent infringement claim hit. When did you take this? I asked. 10 minutes ago. It was just sitting there, open. I handed the phone back. Can you act completely normal for the next few weeks? Brady looked at me without hesitation. Yes, I've been doing it for months. That stopped me. Months, since January, since I figured out something was wrong. He put the phone back in his pocket. I'm not stupid, Grandpa. I see things. I know you're not stupid. Are you going to help Mom? Yes. Good. He nodded. Once grabbed a glass from the cabinet, filled it with water from the tap, drank it standing at the sink, set the glass down. I'm going back upstairs now. If anyone asks, I came down for water, and you were getting water too, and we said goodnight. Brady, I know Grandpa. He looked at me with eyes that were older than 16. I know what you're doing. I've known since you bought that camera and put it in the dictionary. I'm on your side. He went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding an empty glass, realizing that my grandson had been watching and waiting and documenting for months while I thought I was protecting him by keeping him in the dark. Later that night, around 11 o'clock, I sat alone in my garage room with the door closed and the small desk lamp casting the only light. Draped over the back of my chair was Ida's gray wool sweater, She'd knitted it the winter before she died. Simple gray wool, even stitching. Slightly high crew neck that she'd designed specifically to block the Boston wind. I'd found it in her closet after the funeral and couldn't bring myself to give it away. Tomorrow was the gala, the Four Seasons. $1,500 bottles of wine and physicians in tuxedos and a $3.2 million celebration of a product built on 20 years of Ida's work, and her name wouldn't be spoken once. I picked up the sweater, held it. Let me tell you who Ida really was, because they won't tell you tomorrow night. She had earned her biochemistry degree and never stopped using it. She sat beside 400 hospice patients over 20 years at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. 400 people who were dying, most of them strangers, most of them alone. She logged their pain with arthritic hands in her final years, the notebook entries getting shakier but never stopping, never giving up. The first page of that notebook, written in 2003 in blue ink, her promise to every person she'd ever sat beside who suffered in silence. Still true 21 years later. Still true. I put the sweater on, not because the room was cold, but because I needed to remember. I turned off the light, sat in the dark with Ida's sweater on the wool soft against my skin, still holding the shape of her hands from where she'd knitted each stitch 20 months ago. And for the first time in 14 months since the morning, I found her chair empty and the tea cold. I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. Tomorrow, I would walk into a room full of people who had stolen her work, and they would see me wearing her armor. Tomorrow came. I stepped into the ballroom at 7 o'clock Friday evening, wearing Ada's gray sweater, simple wool against 200 guests in tuxedos and cocktail dresses, champagne and silk and calculated smiles. The Four Seasons Hotel, Boston 15th floor ballroom, warm chandelier lighting, white-clothed tables arranged in a semicircle around a small stage, silver trays of champagne glasses circulating among New England's medical elite, physicians, pharmacists, investors who specialized in pharmaceutical startups. Light jazz playing from speakers I couldn't see. The kind of event where wealth whispers instead of shouts. I walked in wearing Ida's sweater like armor. Viveka spotted me within 30 seconds. She crossed the room, quickly heels clicking on polished floor, and pulled me to a corner near the coat check. "Dad," she said, voice low and urgent. "You can't wear that here. People will think—" Stellan appeared beside her before she could finish. He rested one hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Let him," Stellan said, looking at me with something that might have been sympathy if you didn't know better. "He's fine." Not mercy. Calculation. He wanted me to look out of place, diminished. The grieving widower who didn't understand what black tie optional meant, who showed up to his daughter's triumph wearing his dead wife's clothes. Viveka hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, just stay toward the back during the presentation, please." I stayed toward the back. At 7:30, Viveka took the stage. 8 minutes, I timed it. 8 full minutes talking about Nature Path, pain relief oil, the innovative formulation, the market opportunity, the distribution partnerships already secured, the capital raised, the lives this product would change. You need to understand what it meant to stand in that room wearing her sweater while my daughter spoke for 8 minutes without saying Ida's name once. Not once. Not my mother's research, not my mother's legacy, not inspired by my mother's 20 years of hospice work. Just the product, just the company, just the money. When she finished, the room erupted in polite applause. Viveka smiled, stepped down from the stage, and disappeared into a crowd of congratulations. I stood at the back, hands in my pockets, and scanned the room. That's when I saw him. Gerald Ramsey, 63 with silver hair slicked back, and a custom navy suit that cost more than most cars, watched me from across the ballroom with the controlled smile of a man who had waited 25 years for this exact moment. His face had aged since 1999, deeper lines around the eyes, thinner at the jaw, but I would have recognized that expression anywhere. The tiny smirk, the predator's patience. He walked across the room directly toward me, weaving between clusters of conversation with practiced ease. Extended his hand when he reached me. "Raymond Barnes," he said. His voice was smooth, confident. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I shook his hand. Firm grip. Neither of us looked away. "Hello, Gerald," I said, enjoying my wife's work. His smile widened just slightly. "Your daughter has built something remarkable. You should be very proud." "I am of Ida." "Of course." He released my hand. She was quite the inspiration, I understand. A hospice volunteer, Vivica tells me. Wonderful woman. We stood there for a moment, two old men in a room full of people who had no idea what was happening between us. Enjoy the party, Gerald, I said. Oh, I intend to. He walked away. I watched him blend back into the crowd, accepting a champagne glass from a passing server, laughing at something someone said. 30 minutes later, around 8 o'clock, I found myself standing in a small circle near a window overlooking Boston Common. Vivica and Stellan were there, along with two investors whose names I didn't catch and didn't care about. Gerald Ramsey stood 2 steps behind Vivica listening. One of the investors, middle-aged man, expensive watch. The kind of confident ignorance that comes from never being wrong about money turned to Vivica with genuine curiosity. The formula, he said. Where did it originate? I've heard conflicting stories. Vivica smiled. My mother was the inspiration. She was a hospice volunteer for many years, very dedicated to helping people at end of life. Stellan added his voice, carrying that patronizing warmth he used when talking about things that didn't matter to him. My late mother-in-law was a passionate woman, a hospice volunteer, very sweet, very dedicated. The investor nodded, satisfied with this tidy narrative. Then he turned to me. And you, sir, you must be very proud of Vivica for bringing this to market. I opened my mouth to respond. Vivica spoke first. Dad, honestly. She glanced at my gray sweater, then back at the circle with an expression somewhere between embarrassment and apology. You're making this awkward. Mom was a volunteer, not a scientist. She just mixed some plants together. Her voice carried. Nearby tables went quiet. The real work is what we've built on top of it. Stellan nodded once in agreement. Gerald Ramsey, standing directly behind Vivica, where she couldn't see him, slowly raised his champagne glass. He caught my eye over the rim and smiled, that same tiny knowing smile. I looked back at him, then down at the glass of mineral water in my own hand, still cold, ice cubes not yet melted. I drank it, completely dry, every drop. Set the glass onto the nearest table with a level of control and composure that surprised even me. Excuse me, I said to the circle. I need to make a phone call. I walked out to the hotel corridor. The muffled sound of jazz and champagne laughter followed me through the closed ballroom doors. It was 8:12 p.m. Otis Bryant answered on the second ring. Oh, Danny, he said. How's the party been? Otis, I said. My voice came out completely flat. We're a go, all three, first thing Monday morning. There was a pause on the other end, then, You're sure? I'm sure. No warning, no negotiation. No warning. Understood. I'll have everything ready by 8 a.m. Monday. USPTO, FBI, and SEC, simultaneous filing. Thank you. I hung up, stood outside the ballroom in the hotel corridor, the sound of the gala muted behind expensive doors. I put my hand flat against the wall to steady myself. Ida's sweater was warm. Monday, 3 moves, no warning. Then I went back inside and finished my water. Somewhere in that room, Gerald Ramsey was celebrating a victory he didn't know he'd already lost. Gerald celebrated Friday night. I went home and went to work. Let me tell you about the room they thought they'd push me into and what they never understood about why I chose it. It was late Friday night, just after 10 o'clock. I'd driven home from the Four Seasons in silence, Ida's gray sweater still on, the taste of that final insult still in my mouth. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, everyone asleep. I walked past the hallway mirror, the one with Stellan's hidden camera behind it, and went to my garage room, the smallest room in the house, the one they'd relegated me to, the one beside the washing machine and the storage boxes, but also the room that housed the central circuit breaker panel and the property's network router. They thought they'd push me down here. They were wrong. I chose this room. Second week, they moved in October 2023, when they were still unpacking boxes and rearranging furniture. They'd push me down here. What they never thought to ask was what else lived in this room. The circuit breaker, the network router, everything that controlled the house's information flow. Said I wanted to be closer to the ground floor. They'd accepted it without question because it fit their narrative, the old man accepting his diminished place. What they didn't know, I'd spent 32 years in biochemical engineering, which meant 32 years working with lab networks, data systems, and information security protocols. I understood routers the way some people understand recipes. In mid-February, 3 days after I overheard Stellan's phone call about the notebook, I installed a small packet sniffer into the network router, a device about the size of a USB drive that monitors all traffic passing through the network. Completely legal. I own the house, I own the network, I set it up, I pay the internet bill every month. Every piece of data that flows through that router belongs to me. Every email Stellan sent to Gerald from inside this house passed through a device I controlled. Over the past 6 weeks, I'd intercepted and read 43 emails exchanged between Stellan Lockwood and Gerald Ramsey, 43 detailed messages laying out their entire conspiracy, the timeline for stealing the formula, the plan to transfer Vivica's equity, the strategy for using shell companies to hide Gerald's involvement, the calculations about how much money they'd make while leaving my daughter holding worthless paper. You need to understand what it means to read 43 emails detailing how someone plans to destroy your daughter's life and to do nothing yet because the timing isn't right. To watch the pieces move across the board. To wait. I open my laptop and access the archive. Every email time-stamped and logged, every attachment, every incriminating detail. I backed up the entire archive onto a fourth encrypted drive, labeled it carefully in my neat engineering handwriting, Stellan Gerald Correspondence Evidence Copy, 1 of 3. Prepared a duplicate for Otis to receive Monday morning at his office along with the camera footage, the patent documentation, and everything else we'd need for the 3 simultaneous strikes. I turned off the router monitor, shut the laptop, sat for a moment in the dark. In 2 days, Stellan would wake up Monday morning thinking he had time. He didn't. The next morning, Saturday at 9 o'clock, I met Otis at First Citizens Bank in Brookline. He was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, 2 coffees already purchased, wearing weekend clothes instead of his usual suit. We didn't say much, just nodded at each other. The bank employee led me back to the private safe deposit room, a small windowless space with a table and a single chair. "I'll give you privacy," she said, and closed the door. I opened the box. Inside were 3 envelopes. The first contained the original patent certificate. The second held the deed to the Brookline house. The third was marked in Ida's handwriting, dated 2021. Only open when Ray needs it most. She'd written that instruction 3 years ago when she knew her illness was taking her and there wasn't much time left. I opened the envelope. 2 pages, handwritten in blue ink. Her familiar script, slightly shaky from the arthritis that had started affecting her hands, but still precise. Still, Ida. The first line read, "Stop apologizing for her." I sat down. She was talking about Vivica, about all the times over the years when our daughter would say something cutting at a family dinner, something dismissive, something cruel, and I would spend the rest of the evening apologizing to whoever she'd insulted. She didn't mean it. She's just stressed. You know how she gets. Stop apologizing for her, Ida had written. She means it. She always has. And you protecting her from consequences hasn't helped either of you. I kept reading. The second page contained a list of words that looked random at first formulas. Respect, assets, security, evidence, records, trust, Whitfield, foundation. Then I saw it, the first letters. FRASERTWF. Fraser and Whitfield Trust Company. Ida had established an irrevocable trust back in 2018, 6 years before any of this happened. 6 years before Stellan and Vivica showed up at my door with 14 boxes and a rented truck. Inside that trust, $340,000, earmarked exclusively for Brady and Marigold, dispersed in structured phases between ages 18 and 25, restricted solely to education and housing, with me named as sole trustee. She'd essentially disinherited Vivica years before this story began. The letter's final line, "The children didn't choose their parents, Ray. Make sure they have a way out." I folded the letter and put it in the breast pocket of my jacket over my heart, where Ida's words could rest against the place she used to lay her head when we danced in our kitchen on Sunday mornings 30 years ago. I sat there in that small, windowless room for a long time, not crying, just sitting, feeling the weight of paper against my chest. She'd known. Years ago, she'd known exactly what Vivica would become, what she was capable of. And instead of hoping it would change, instead of pretending Ida had quietly built a wall around the grandchildren and made sure they'd have a way out. I walked out to the lobby where Otis was waiting with 2 coffees. He looked at my face and didn't ask any questions. He just handed me the cup. We stood there for a moment, 2 old men drinking coffee in a bank lobby on a Saturday morning. "And she knew, didn't she?" Otis said finally. "She always knew," I said. And now, with Ida's letter in my pocket and her trust protecting the children she loved, I had every weapon I needed for Monday morning. Monday morning came with every weapon in place. Ida's letter in my desk drawer, the patent in the vault, the camera footage backed up on 4 encrypted drives, the 43 emails archived and ready, and 2 weeks of waiting for the trap to close. That Monday, April 14th, mid-morning, Vivica walked into breakfast with her phone held high like a trophy. Her face lit with the kind of joy I hadn't seen since she was a child. "We did it, Dad." She set the phone on the table in front of me, screen showing charts and numbers and projections. 2,000 bottles, shipped to 15 pharmacies across New England. The first major batch is officially out there. Marigold sat across from me, eating cereal milk dripping from her spoon. Brady was at the counter pouring orange juice. Stellan stood by the coffee maker checking his own phone with that satisfied expression of a man watching money appear in accounts. And the best part, Vivica continued practically glowing. The next purchase order is already locked in. 3,500 more bottles. They're projecting we could be at 10,000 units by June. She looked at me, waiting for validation, waiting for me to be proud. I smiled. "That's wonderful, honey." Marigold looked up from her cereal. Her 13-year-old eyes, sharp and observant, studied my face with the kind of attention that made me understand why Ida had loved her so much. "Oh, Grandpa," she said quietly, "why do you look like you're thinking about something else?" "I'm just doing math in my head, sweetheart," I said. And I was, doing math, executing a countdown in real time while my daughter celebrated. 2,000 bottles shipped as of today, April 14th. The earliest consumers, the ones who purchased on day 1 from those 15 pharmacies, would begin using the product immediately. Terminal cancer patients desperate for pain relief, hospice patients, people suffering the way Ida had spent 20 years trying to help. Days 1 through 3, effective pain relief. The formula would work exactly as promised. They would feel better. They would tell their doctors. They would recommend it to others. Day 7, April 21st, 1 week from today. That's when the adverse reactions would begin manifesting. Mild skin irritation at application sites, itching, redness, the kind of reactions that would prompt concerned phone calls to pharmacists, questions to doctors. Day 10, slight elevation in liver enzyme levels for anyone using the product consistently. Nothing catastrophic, nothing life-threatening, but enough to show up in routine blood work, enough to trigger investigations. You need to understand what it means to sit at a breakfast table doing arithmetic about human suffering counting days, until strangers begin to itch to wonder, to call their doctors with the first symptoms of a poison disguised as medicine. To know that you could stop it with a single phone call and to choose not to, because stopping it now would let the people responsible escape. I sat there with my coffee watching Vivica's joy counting days. Stellan's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen. I watched his face change. The satisfied expression disappeared, replaced by something else, something cold. He stared at the text message for a long time, long enough that Vivica noticed. "Everything okay?" she asked. Stellan slowly lowered his coffee mug without drinking, set it on the counter with careful precision. His hand was steady, but his jaw was tight. "Fine," he said, but his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "Just investor question." He pulled out a chair at the breakfast table and sat down. Didn't touch the food Vivica had set out for him. Just sat there, phone in his hand, staring at something I couldn't see. I watched him carefully. Watched the exact moment realization dawned across his face. The moment he understood something had gone wrong. Through the network monitor I'd installed in the garage room router, the one that captured every piece of digital traffic in this house, I would read the follow-up email in about 40 minutes. I already knew what it would say. Someone somewhere had finally read the formula carefully enough. A chemist at one of Gerald's quality control labs, maybe. Or a consultant reviewing the compound structure. Someone who'd looked at page 17D and noticed the discontinuities, the markers that indicated an incomplete trial batch. Someone who understood what Ida's inverted triangle meant. Marigold kept eating her cereal, watching both of us now. Grandfather and father sitting at opposite ends of the table, both doing math in our heads for very different reasons. "Vivica," Stellan said suddenly, "what day did the first shipment leave the warehouse?" "Friday," she said, still looking at her phone. "April 12th. Why?" "Just confirming timeline." He stood up, pushed his chair back. "I need to make a call. Now it's breakfast. Now." He took his phone and walked to the kitchen, the one room in the house he thought was safe from everything. The room that shared a wall with Marigold's bedroom. The room where he'd made all those secretive calls about making the family rich. The room where every word still passed through a router I owned, in a house I owned on a network I paid for every month. Vivica looked at me. Is he okay? He seemed stressed. Probably just business, I said. You know how it is with investors. She nodded, accepting that explanation, and went back to her phone and her victory and her projections about 10,000 units by June. Marigold finished her cereal, carried her bowl to the sink, paused beside my chair on her way out of the kitchen. Grzhenbe, she said quietly so only I could hear. You're not actually doing math, are you? I looked at her, 13 years old with her grandmother's eyes. Yes, I said, I am. She studied my face for another moment, then nodded and went upstairs to get ready for school. But by then, it would be far too late to stop what he'd already set in motion. Stellan knew, but knowing and stopping are different things. By the time he understood what the flawed formula would do, 2,000 bottles were already in circulation. The mechanism was in motion. The countdown had begun. Day 8. After the product launched, I opened my laptop at 5:43 in the morning, before the sun, before the house woke, before anyone could see what I needed to check. April the 22nd, 2024. The garage room was dark except for the blue glow of my screen. Outside, birds were just starting to make noise. Inside, the house was silent. Everyone sleeping. Everyone still believing that yesterday's celebration about shipping numbers meant victory. I opened my network monitor first. The overnight email logs loaded slowly line by line. Timestamps. Sender addresses. Recipients. There. 2:17 a.m. Stellan to Gerald Ramsey. I clicked it open. We have a day-8 reaction problem, Stellan had written. 2 reports so far. Manageable. The email had been sent from this house, from his laptop, probably from the master bedroom while Vivica slept beside him, unaware. I scrolled down to Gerald's reply, timestamped 5:03 a.m. Do not pull product. Proceed as planned. This is phase 1 of what we discussed. I read it twice, then a third time. Gerald knew. He knew there were adverse reactions happening to real people, terminal cancer patients using the product for pain relief, and he was deliberately choosing to keep selling it anyway. Not waiting for organic failure, actively pushing toward catastrophic collapse. I opened another tab, found the New England Herbal Consumer Facebook group that I'd been monitoring since the product launched. 2 new posts from overnight, both in the last 6 hours. The first praised the product's effectiveness during days 1 through 3. Finally, something that actually works for nerve pain. But then, day 7 started noticing some itching at the application site. Day 8 this morning, definite redness. Not sure if this is normal. The second post was similar. 3 days of relief, then discomfort, itching, mild irritation that was progressing. Nothing critical yet, nothing life-threatening, but enough to raise questions, enough to prompt phone calls to doctors, enough to start the investigation that would eventually reveal what Ida had known 10 years ago when she drew that inverted triangle on page 17D. This is the moment the story stopped being about intellectual property and family betrayal. This became about real people, strangers with stage 4 diagnoses putting poison on their skin because Gerald Ramsey wanted leverage in a business deal. I opened a blank email, typed Otis Bryant's address at the top. Subject line FDA, now, all of it. Body, Gerald knows about day 8 reactions, telling Stellan to keep selling, email evidence attached, need to escalate immediately, real people being harmed. I attached the intercepted emails, hit send, closed the laptop, sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to the house breathe. 1 week later, late April Tuesday night, around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Otis Bryant. His voice had a tone I'd rarely heard from him in 30 years, guarded, careful. Danny, he said, the SEC just found something we weren't even looking for. I was in the garage room, door closed, lamp on. The rest of the house was winding down for the night. Vivica upstairs working on marketing materials. Stellan, wherever Stellan went in the evenings. Tell me, I said. Preliminary response came back from the SEC market manipulation complaint. They started digging into Gerald's shell companies, tracking the money flow. Found an anomalous transaction. I waited. Stellan sold Vivica's stake, Otis said. Her entire 51% equity in Nature Path. Sold it to Gerald's Delaware shell company 10 days before the product even launched. I sat very still. At how much? $1 million, wired to a Panama bank account that Stellan controls. Vivica's name isn't on it. She has no access. She doesn't know, I said. It wasn't a question. No, Stellan had financial power of attorney buried in their marital agreement, signed years ago. He used that authority to execute the sale without her knowledge or consent. I closed my eyes. So she owns nothing, I said. Correct. She's currently running and promoting a company she has zero equity in. Her name is at the top of every legal document. If this implodes, and it will, she's the one facing FDA scrutiny, potential federal charges. But she won't see a single cent from the venture because Stellan already took the money and hid it offshore. What are the charges for Stellan? Securities fraud, federal wire fraud. Combined, we're looking at up to 20 years in federal prison. I sat there processing, thinking about my daughter, about the woman who had stood at the Four Seasons and dismissed Ida's work as just mixing plants together, about the woman who had let them erase 20 years of research without speaking up once, but also thinking about the woman who was being systematically destroyed by her own husband, who was being set up to take the fall for crimes she didn't even know were being committed. Danny, Otis said carefully, do we tell Vivica now? I thought about it, about Ida's letter in my desk drawer, about Brady photographing that laptop screen, about Marigold asking if Grandma could still see us, about justice and mercy and the difference between them. Not yet, I said. But when the timing is precise, we will. Understood. How precise is our documentation? Ironclad. We have the SEC's preliminary findings, the wire transfer records, the Delaware corporate filings showing the equity transfer, the Panama account documentation, all time-stamped, all traceable. Good, I said. Hold it, we'll need it. After I hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about my daughter. She had used me. She had let them use Ida. She had stood in that ballroom and celebrated a product built on stolen research while wearing a smile that never reached her eyes. But someone had also been using her, selling her out, stealing her shares, leaving her name on every legal document while routing the money to Panama. And she didn't know it. Ida's letter echoed in my mind. The children didn't choose their parents, Ray. Make sure they have a way out. No, but sometimes the parents don't choose wisely either. Vivica had chosen Stellan, had built a life with him, had trusted him with power of attorney and equity and the future of a company that bore her mother's stolen work. And he had sold her, literally, for $1 million and a Panama account she couldn't access. Monday morning was coming, the first Monday of May, and with it 3 strikes that would detonate everything at once. Monday came, the first Monday of May 2024, the morning when 8 months of waiting would compress into 60 seconds of action. At exactly 9 o'clock, I clicked the mouse 3 times. 3 windows open on 3 separate monitors in my garage office, 3 federal agencies, 3 simultaneous strikes designed to hit before Stellan or Gerald could coordinate any defense. Otis Bryant was on speakerphone, his voice calm and methodical from his office downtown. Ready when you are, Danny, he said. Now, I said. First click, United States Patent and Trademark Office. Patent infringement claim. Nature Path, pain relief oil violates patent US 102345567, filed jointly by Raymond and Ida Barnes in 2019, granted 2020. The formulation Stellan photographed from Ida's notebook infringes on intellectual property we legally owned. Demand for immediate temporary restraining order, halting all product sales. Demand for complete revenue freeze pending federal review. Second click, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Boston Field Office. Federal Wiretap Act Violation Report, under Title 18. United States Code, Section 2511. Evidence package attached video footage showing Stellan Lockwood planting surveillance device behind hallway mirror without consent of property owner or residents. Federal felony carrying up to 5 years in prison. Third click, Securities and Exchange Commission, Northeast Regional Office. Market manipulation complaint under SEC Rule 10b-5. Evidence package attached intercepted email correspondence between Stellan Lockwood and Gerald Ramsey detailing conspiracy to suppress adverse reaction, data mislead investors and orchestrate controlled company failure for acquisition purposes. 3 clicks, 3 agencies, all within the same 60-second window. Otis was monitoring from his end, watching the electronic filing systems process each submission in real time. USPTO stamped and filed, he said. Case number 2, 4-CV-8847, 9:01 a.m. 15 seconds. FBI received complaint package. Agent Kowalski signed for it. 9:01 a.m. 30 seconds. SEC acknowledgement confirmed. Investigator Torres assigned. 9:02 a.m. I sat back in my chair. The coffee cup on my desk had gone cold an hour ago. I hadn't touched it. The morning light came through the single garage window at a specific angle, creating a bright rectangle on the concrete floor. The computer fans hummed steadily. Somewhere above me, I could hear Vivica's footsteps in the master bedroom, getting dressed, getting ready for a Monday she thought would be like any other Monday. She had no idea that 3 federal agencies had just received evidence packages with her husband's name at the center of multiple felonies. "Danny," Otis said quietly through the speaker. 8 months from garage discovery to garage victory. Symmetry. Symmetry. I agreed. This was the moment, the synchronized precision of it. The coordination that had required weeks of preparation, federal office scheduling knowledge, strategic timing, to prevent Gerald from using his connections to delay or bury any single filing. Hit them all at once. Give them no time to breathe. My phone buzzed. Text from Otis. 3 for 3. They just got served. I allowed myself a moment to imagine what was happening in other places across Boston right now. Stellan's phone lighting up with a USPTO case number notification. His face going pale as he read the words patent infringement and temporary restraining order and immediate halt to all sales. Gerald Ramsey's assistant rushing into his corner office at Biomedica with an FBI inquiry letter, hand-delivered, requiring immediate response regarding Federal Wiretap Act violations and conspiracy charges. SEC investigator Torres placing a call to Stellan's attorney if Stellan even had an attorney, yet requesting voluntary interview regarding market manipulation allegations. The power dynamic had reversed. I was no longer the betrayed father sitting in the smallest room of his own house. I was the orchestrator, the engineer who had spent 32 years in pharmaceutical research, learning how to document how to build cases, how to execute with precision. Before I show you what happened when those notifications reached them, if you're still with me, comment A if you think Gerald stays ice cold, or B if you think he panics. Add one reason. Please note, what follows contains recreated details for storytelling purposes. The lesson is what I hope stays with you. Hope stays. The phone on my desk rang. Not my cell phone. The house landline. The one only family used. I didn't answer it. I knew who it was. I knew what the conversation would be. Stellan calling Vivica from wherever he was. Panic in his voice. Trying to explain why federal agencies were suddenly contacting him. Trying to spin it as a misunderstanding. Trying to control the narrative before she had time to process what was actually happening. The ringing stopped, then started again 30 seconds later. I let it ring. Otis was still on speakerphone. "They'll activate crisis protocols now," he said. "Gerald will call his legal team. Stellan will try to contain Vivica. They'll coordinate their story." "I know," I said. "I thought about 8 months ago. October. The moment I'd opened that storage drawer looking for an old Altoid tin to store screws and found it empty except for a receipt from a hotel I'd never been to. The first tiny crack that would eventually become this 3 federal agencies, 3 simultaneous strikes, a coordinated assault that left no room for defensive maneuvers. 8 months from tin to triple strike. Ida would have appreciated the methodical progression, the patience, the precision. "Danny," Otis said, "what if they try to settle? Gerald has resources. He'll offer to make this go away quietly." "They can't settle criminal charges," I said. "The FBI doesn't negotiate. The SEC doesn't take bribes. And the patent is ironclad. But they'll try something, some kind of countermove." "They will," I agreed. "Stellan will call Vivica within the next 10 minutes. Gerald will activate his crisis team within the next hour. They'll coordinate defensive strategies. They'll hire the best attorneys money can buy." I looked at the 3 monitors, 3 confirmation numbers, 3 case files now active in 3 separate federal systems. "But I already knew what Plan B was," I said. Their Plan B was predictable: deny, delay, and deflect. Hire the best attorneys, claim misunderstanding, paint me as a bitter old man seeking revenge. I'd written down their strategy 6 weeks ago and filed it in my desk drawer. Every move they'd make, I'd already countered. But first they had to understand what had actually happened. The front door slammed at 3:07 p.m. and Vivica's heels hammered the hallway floor like gunshots. I was sitting in the living room, waiting. The coffee table in front of me held 3 sets of documents arranged in neat stacks: patent certificate, USPTO filing confirmation, email printouts. Vivica burst into the room, clutching a white envelope, the USPTO notification that had been delivered to her office an hour earlier. Her face was flushed. Her hands were shaking. "What did you do?" she demanded. I gestured to the coffee table. "Sit down." "What did you do?" "Sit down." She sat, not because she wanted to, but because something in my voice made her. I picked up the first document, the patent certificate. "This is patent U S102345567, I said calmly. "Filed jointly by Raymond and Ida Barnes in 2019, granted in 2020. It covers a comprehensive biochemical formula for palliative pain management derived from botanical compounds. 97 pages of technical specifications." I set it down in front of her. "Your nature path. Pain relief oil uses a formula photographed from your mother's notebook. That formula infringes on intellectual property that your mother and I legally own." Vivica stared at the document. "You filed a patent on Mom's work. We filed it together, 3 years before she died, because she knew we both knew what could happen if we didn't protect it." I picked up the second document, the USPTO filing. "As of 9:01 this morning, the United States Patent and Trademark Office has frozen all sales of your product. Temporary restraining order. All revenue is frozen pending federal review. You cannot sell another bottle until this is resolved in federal court." I watched her process that, watched the color drain from her face. "And this," I said, picking up the third set of papers, "is every email between Stellan and Gerald Ramsey for the past 6 months, discussing how to steal the formula, how to suppress adverse reaction data, how to manipulate stock prices, all of it." I set the emails down in front of her. "I handed those to the FBI this morning, and to the SEC, and to the Patent Office. Your husband is facing federal charges, multiple counts." Vivica looked at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. "You're doing this to your own daughter." Her voice came out raw, broken. "You're destroying me, your own daughter." "No," I said. My voice was steady, calm. "I'm doing this for your mother." The front door opened again, footsteps in the hallway. Stellan appeared in the living room doorway, his phone in his hand, his face pale. He looked at Vivica, then at me, then at the documents on the coffee table. For the first time in 8 months, Stellan Lockwood had absolutely nothing to say. I looked past him to the staircase. Brady and Marigold were sitting on the steps watching, 13 and 16 years old, watching their parents' world collapse in real time. For 8 months I'd imagined this moment. I never expected it to feel this empty. Stellan turned and walked out. Didn't say a word, just left. The front door opened and closed. His car started in the driveway. He was gone. Vivica sat there staring at the papers, tears running down her face, not making a sound. I stood up. "Otis Bryant's number is in my desk. Call him. He can recommend attorneys who specialize in federal defense. You're going to need one." Then I went to my garage room and closed the door. 6 hours later at 9 p.m., there was a knock on the garage door. Brady. He stood there with his phone in his hand, looking older than 16, looking like someone who'd been carrying weight for a long time. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "I have something." He handed me his phone. On the screen was a photograph of a laptop email. The image was slightly blurry but readable. From Stellan Lockwood to Gerald Ramsey. Date: March 28th, 2024. Subject: timeline confirmation. Transfer the remaining 51% before she has time to consult anyone. Once distribution contracts are signed, April 15th, she'll have no leverage to object. Proceed exactly as discussed. I looked at the date, March 28th, 2 weeks before the product even launched. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "I took it the same night I took the other one," Brady said. "The one about phase 2. But this email Dad sent it using cellular data, not the house Wi-Fi. So your thing wouldn't have caught it. My packet sniffer, he knew about that." "I didn't know if it mattered," Brady continued. "But after today, I thought maybe it did." I looked at the photograph again, the 44th email. The one that proved premeditation with date stamps. The one that showed Stellan had planned to sell Vivica's equity weeks before launch, documenting the timeline and writing to Gerald. The 44th email glowed on Brady's phone screen like the last puzzle piece falling into place. "Can I send this to myself?" I asked. Brady nodded. I forwarded the image to my own phone, then handed his back. We stood there in the doorway of the garage room for a moment. Grandfather and grandson. The house was quiet around us. "It's Grandpa," Brady said finally. "Can you help my mom? Despite everything?" I thought about that question. About Vivica sitting in the living room 6 hours ago, crying over documents that proved her husband had been destroying her. About the woman who'd dismissed her mother's work as just mixing plants together. About the daughter who'd let them erase Ida from her own legacy. But also about the woman whose own husband had stolen everything from her and left her name on all the legal documents while he hid money in Panama. "I will try," I said. Brady nodded, then he went back upstairs. I sat down at my desk and opened my email. Attached Brady's photograph. Typed Otis Bryant's address at the top. Subject, 44th email. Premeditation proof. Body from Brady. Sent via cellular, March 28th. Proves timeline. Criminal charges. Hit send. The timestamp read 9:31 p.m. Across the city, Stellan still hadn't come home. But by morning, he'd discovered that the premeditation evidence, the email that proved he'd planned to steal Vivica's equity weeks before launch, now sat in a federal prosecutor's inbox. By morning, Stellan knew. By morning, everyone knew. The 44th email with its timestamps and premeditation timeline had reached exactly the right hands. But that was Tuesday night. Thursday morning brought something I'd been waiting for since the moment I filed those 3 strikes. Gerald's countermove. The Boston Business Journal headline hit my phone at 7:42 a.m. Thursday. Biomedica CEO files FDA complaint against Nature. Path unsafe product, no clinical trial. I was sitting in my garage office with my first coffee of the morning. I read the article twice. Then I called Otis. "You've seen it," he said, answering before the second ring. "I've seen it." Gerald filed a detailed FDA brief accusing Nature Path of violating 21 CFR Part 312, clinical trial regulations. He's claiming the product never went through proper testing poses. Public health risk should be immediately banned. I watched my computer screen, pulled up the stock ticker. Nature Path LLC wasn't publicly traded, but the parent company's value was tanking in real time. Down 40%, down 50%. "Stock's cratering," I said. "Down 67% as of 10 minutes ago." Otis confirmed. "Gerald's not trying to defend himself, Danny. He's trying to destroy the company's valuation entirely. Crater it to 0, then buy the formula from bankruptcy for pennies." "I know," I said. "You know, CrossBio," I said. 8.3%. Plus institutional allies I've been coordinating with. For the past 3 months, total 31.7%. There was silence on the other end. "Danny," Otis said slowly, "that's enough to demand an extraordinary general meeting under SEC Rule 14A. "Correct." "You positioned for this exact move 3 months ago?" "Correct." Another pause. Then, "You weren't just building a defense, you were building a siege engine." "You said that already, in the elevator, remember?" I could hear him smiling through the phone. "How many moves ahead are you?" "2 more," I said. "Just 2 more. 32 years engineering pharmaceutical compounds. And it all came down to this: who filed the paperwork first." Friday morning, 6:30 a.m., my phone rang. Vivica, calling from upstairs. Her voice was wrecked, hysterical. "Daddy's gone." I sat up in bed. "Who's gone?" "Stellan. He left a note. It says, 'I'm sorry. Couldn't fix this. Don't look for me.'" I got out of bed, pulled on pants. "Where are you?" "Master bedroom." I woke up and he wasn't here. The note was on his pillow. "Dad." I checked the accounts, joint accounts. Everything's gone, drained. And the credit cards, they're all declined. Everything. He took everything. In the background, I could hear Marigold crying, saying something I couldn't make out. Then, "Mom, stop crying." Vivica. I said, using the voice I'd used when she was 16 and had wrecked the car and called me panicking, calm, authoritative. "Listen to me carefully. Call Otis Bryant immediately. His number is in my desk, top drawer. Call him now. The FBI is going to contact you within the next 48 hours about Stellan's financial transactions. You need someone in your corner before that happens. The FBI, within 48 hours. Call Otis now. I hung up. Stood there in my small room beside the garage, listening to the house wake up around me. Vivica's footsteps overhead. Marigold's muffled crying. Brady's door opening. Stellan had run, taken the money, and run. I wasn't surprised. Sunday morning, 10 a.m., 2 men in dark suits appeared at my front door. Special Agent Rebecca Kowalski, the senior of the two, showed her FDA credentials first. Mid-40s precise manner, the kind of federal investigator who'd spent 20 years building cases. Beside her stood Special Agent John Morrison, younger early 30s, carrying a leather portfolio, and wearing the expression of someone who actually read technical documentation for a living. "Mr. Barnes," Kowalski said, "we need to ask you some questions about Nature Path Pain Relief Oil. May we come in?" "Of course." I led them to the living room. Vivica was sitting on the couch with Otis Bryant beside her. She'd barely spoken since Friday, barely eaten. Just sat there with papers around her, trying to understand how her life had collapsed in 5 days. Kowalski didn't sit. "We need production logs and corporate filings for Nature Path. Complete documentation of the formula's development and any clinical testing conducted." I walked to my desk, picked up an envelope I'd prepared 2 weeks ago, handed it to her. "This is a certified copy of Patent US 102334567, I said. "Filed jointly by my late wife Ida Barnes and myself in 2019, granted in 2020. You'll find it establishes us as the original developers. Vivica's company used our intellectual property without authorization." Kowalski opened the envelope. Morrison looked over her shoulder. "There's also a complete adverse reaction dossier in there," I continued, "which I submitted to the FDA 2 weeks ago, before Gerald Ramsey filed his complaint. You'll find I documented the Day 7 and Day 8 reactions in real time as consumer reports came in." Morrison looked up at me. "You're the original whistleblower?" "Yes." Kowalski was reading through the papers, her expression unchanging, professional, thorough. "Mr. Barnes," Morrison said, "do you have the complete original formula? The safe, effective version?" I looked at him, at this young federal agent who would write a report that would end up in congressional testimony someday when they investigated how a flawed formula made it to market. "I have everything," I said. "I always have." Stellan's note had 3 sentences. Gerald's FDA brief had 47 pages. Mine had 2 moves left. After the agents left, Vivica went upstairs with Otis. They'd be up there for hours, going through documents, building her defense, trying to separate her from Stellan's crimes, enough that she wouldn't spend the next decade in federal prison. I went to my garage office, pulled up 2 files on my desktop, documents I'd prepared 3 months earlier in February when I first understood the full scope of what Gerald was planning. 2 more moves, just 2 more, and Gerald Ramsey would understand what checkmate looked like. Otis Bryant arrived at 9 a.m. Monday with a leather briefcase and no pleasantries. I watched through the front window as his silver Lexus pulled into the driveway, watched him gather his things with the methodical precision of a man who delivered bad news 1,000 times. Vivica stood beside me, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold despite the May warmth. "He wouldn't come here unless..." She didn't finish. "Unless there's no Stellan to find," I said, "or unless what he found is worse than not finding him." Otis's knock was professional, 3 raps evenly spaced. Vivica opened the door. No greeting, no pretense. Otis stepped inside, set his briefcase on the entry table, and pulled out a manila folder thick enough to be a novel. "Living room," he said, not a suggestion. We sat. Otis remained standing, folder open in his hands like a prosecutor preparing closing arguments. "I'm going to give you facts," Otis said, eyes on Vivica. "You can cry later. Right now you need to listen." Vivica nodded, jaw tight. "Novamed Ventures LLC exists on paper. 1 member you. Stellan is not listed anywhere, not as owner, not as officer, not as employee." Otis pulled out a document, placed it on the coffee table. "This is the operating agreement filed with the state of California. Your signature. January 12th, 2024. But Stellan said, Stellan lied." Otis's voice carried no sympathy, only fact. He transferred $963,000 from the Novamed Ventures business account to a personal account in the Cayman Islands between April 15th and May 8th. The account is in his name only. You have no access, no claim, no recourse. The air left the room. The intellectual property your mother's research was transferred to Novamed Ventures under fraudulent pretenses. The patent attorney Stellan hired filed the trademark application listing you as inventor, not Stellan. You. Another document hit the table, which means when the FDA investigation concludes, when the lawsuits come, when the criminal inquiry begins, your name is the only name on record. Viveka's hands were shaking. I own nothing, she whispered. Correct. And he's gone. Correct. Then Viveka asked the question I hadn't expected. The people who bought the oil? Her voice cracked. Are they going to be okay? Otis glanced at me. I pulled out my phone, opened the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining since May 1st. 22 adverse reactions reported as of yesterday. I said, all mild, rashes itching, 1 case of contact dermatitis, no hospitalizations. I sent cease and desist notices to every retailer on May 2nd. Most pulled the product within 48 hours. Viveka looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. You've been tracking this since the day I confirmed the formula was compromised. But she stopped, reconsidered. Why would you help me after everything I wasn't helping you, I said quietly. I was protecting the people your husband was about to hurt. The words landed like a slap. Viveka flinched but didn't argue. You know the exact moment someone stops being a child? It's not 18, not 21. It's the first time they hear the truth and don't look for someone else to fix it. Otis closed his folder. FDA's preliminary report clears the base formula, Ida's original research, of any issues. The contamination came from Stellan's manufacturing process. He cut corners, used unapproved solvents, skipped stability testing. He met Viveka's eyes. You have 48 hours to decide whether you're going to cooperate with federal investigators or retain criminal defense counsel. I can recommend both paths, but you need to choose. I don't, Viveka's voice broke. I don't know how to choose that. Then learn, Otis said not unkindly, fast. He handed her a business card, an attorney in Sacramento, specializing in FDA compliance and white-collar defense, and left without another word. The house felt cavernous. Viveka sat on the couch staring at the stack of documents like they were written in hieroglyphics. I could see her cycling through options, searching for an exit that didn't exist. I can't pay for an attorney, she finally said. I know. And I can't run. No? So what do I do? I sat down across from her the same way I'd sat across from Ida 1,000 times when she needed to work through impossible problems. Chemists and cornered daughters, turns out the method's the same. You break it into steps. You call the attorney Otis recommended, I said. You tell him everything. You cooperate with the FDA. You take responsibility for what you signed, even if you didn't understand it. And then you rebuild, slowly, without shortcuts. Viveka wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Why are you helping me? I thought about Ida's letter, the one I'd found in the vault. Take care of Viveka. She'll need you even if she doesn't know it yet. Because you're still my daughter, I said. And your mother would never forgive me if I abandoned you. It was the first time I'd invoked Ida's memory without weaponizing it. No guilt, no manipulation, just truth. Viveka looked at me, really looked for the first time in months. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it, for believing him over you, for... Her voice failed. I know. We sat in silence for a long moment. Not comfortable, but no longer hostile. Progress measured in millimeters. Finally, Viveka picked up the attorney's card. I'll call him today. Good. She stood, gathered the documents Otis had left, and walked upstairs to her room. The door closed softly. I waited until I heard her voice on the phone, halting scared, but talking before I walked out to the garage. The filing cabinet stood in the corner, 2 folders remaining in the bottom drawer. Both had Gerald Ramsey's name on the tab. I pulled out the first one, laid it on the workbench, and opened it. Viveka was taking responsibility for what she'd done. Now it was time to make sure Gerald Ramsey did the same. I had 2 moves left, and Gerald had no idea either one was coming. The first Gerald file contained 3 items: the Stellan Gerald email chain showing full knowledge of formula instability, the SEC complaint form I'd filed 2 weeks prior, and a single sticky note in Ida's handwriting, follow the money. I'd followed it. Now the money was following Gerald. The Biomedica stock chart on my monitor showed a 23% plunge in 2 weeks, the exact pattern Gerald had engineered for Viveka. June 2024, and the Securities and Exchange Commission had opened a formal investigation into market manipulation at Biomedica Ventures. Gerald's own playbook executed against him with surgical precision. I sat in the Beacon Hill apartment I'd rented after Vivica moved back home, watching the red line on the chart descend like a sentencing gavel. The SEC complaint had been simple. Gerald Ramsey, acting CEO of Biomedica Ventures, knowingly facilitated fraudulent patent applications while maintaining undisclosed financial positions in competing firms. Exhibit A: emails between Gerald and Stellan containing the phrase "proceed as planned" despite documented safety concerns. Exhibit B: wire transfers showing Gerald's investment in Cross-Bio Therapeutics, Biomedica's primary competitor, 2 weeks before the patent filing. Exhibit C: my packet sniffer logs, proving Gerald received real-time data from the hidden camera he'd planted in my home. The evidence wasn't just ironclad, it was gift-wrapped. My phone rang. Otis. 31.7%, he said without preamble. EGM mandated December 14th. That's extraordinary general meeting. The shareholder revolt I'd been orchestrating since February had finally accumulated enough signatures to force Gerald in front of the board he'd manipulated for years. And 6 months for Gerald to mount a counteroffensive, I said. He's fighting with an empty hand, Otis replied. The institutional investors see the SEC investigation. They're not stupid. I thought about Gerald sitting in his corner office watching his empire destabilize in real time, unable to identify the engineer behind the collapse. He'd built his career on calculated destruction, buying struggling companies, stripping assets, walking away with millions, while employees lost pensions. Nature Path was supposed to be another entry in that ledger. Vivica was supposed to be collateral damage. He'd miscalculated. December 14th, I repeated. I'll be ready. I know you will, Otis said and hung up. I turned back to the stock chart. Gerald built his empire on calculated collapses. Now he'd watch his own company crater using his playbook. Same tactic, same 23% threshold that triggered institutional panic. Same timeline from investigation announcement to board intervention. The only variable was the target. 1 week later, FBI Special Agent Rebecca Kowalski walked into Otis's 22nd floor office with a briefcase and the bearing of someone who'd spent 20 years extracting truth from liars. She was 47, sharp-featured, with gray-threaded dark hair pulled into a bun that suggested efficiency over aesthetics. Her credentials identified her as the lead investigator on the federal wiretap and securities fraud case, one of 3 parallel prosecutions involving Gerald Ramsey. Otis had warned me she was thorough. Mr. Barnes, she said, shaking my hand with a grip that felt like a polygraph test. Special Agent Kowalski, FBI, I need to debrief you on recent developments. We sat. She opened her briefcase with the precision of a surgeon preparing instruments. Stellan Lockwood was apprehended at Miami International Airport 3 days ago, she began. He was attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica. No extradition treaty. I'd known Stellan would run eventually. Men like him always did. He's cooperating, Agent Kowalski continued. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentencing. He's turned over all communications with Gerald Ramsey, all financial records, and all documentation related to the patent fraud. She pulled out a tablet, turned it toward me. The screen showed an email thread between Stellan and Gerald dated March 2024. The subject line read, "Camera feed operational. This brings me to the device planted in your home," she said, eyes fixed on mine. "We need to discuss legality." "I never touched the camera," I said. "I discovered it, documented it, and monitored the network traffic it generated. The device itself remained exactly where Stellan installed it." "And the packet sniffer?" "Legal network monitoring on my own home network. I captured metadata source, IP destination, IP packet size, timestamps. When forensics analyzed the camera, they found it was streaming to Stellan's phone. My sniffer logs corroborated that stream and proved Gerald Ramsey was receiving copied data in real time." Agent Kowalski made a note. "Forensics also recovered video files from Stellan's phone, footage of your home office, your conversations with your daughter, private family moments." The temperature in the room dropped. "The footage is admissible," she said. "Your packet sniffer captured the network stream legally. You didn't hack the camera, you documented the intrusion. That makes it evidence of a federal wiretap violation. We have Gerald Ramsey on video receiving data he had no legal right to access." 32 years engineering precision compounds. 8 months engineering precision justice. Same methodology, different lab. You'll be the linchpin witness across 3 prosecutions, Agent Kowalski said. USPTO, fraud FBI, wiretap violations, SEC market manipulation. Defense attorneys will come at you hard. This won't be easy. I thought about Ida's notebook, the one Gerald had tried to steal and monetize. I thought about Vivica signing documents she didn't understand because she trusted a man who saw her as inventory. I thought about 22 people who developed rashes because Stellan cut corners and Gerald approved it anyway. I didn't do this because it was easy, I said. Agent Kowalski closed her briefcase. Good. We'll need formal depositions starting August. Clear your calendar. She handed me a business card with a direct line, and left without ceremony. Otis walked to the window, hands in his pockets. You understand what she's saying? Gerald's facing 15 to 20 years if all 3 cases stick. He'll fight like a cornered animal. Hey, let him fight, I said. He's fighting physics. The evidence doesn't care about his desperation. After Agent Kowalski left, I walked to the window overlooking Boston Harbor. The water was calm, indifferent to the machinations happening in offices above it. December 14th was 6 months away, the EGM, where 31.7% of shareholders would force Gerald Ramsey to answer for his crimes in front of the board he'd manipulated for years. 2 more months to prepare testimony. 2 more months for Gerald to realize the walls were closing and there was no exit. Then it would be over. December 14th arrived like any other winter morning in Boston. Gray sky, cold harbor, wind indifferent. The vote on Gerald Ramsey's immediate termination as CEO took 11 seconds, 67% in favor. The gavel fell. 25 years of manipulation ended before the coffee in the boardroom turned cold. I sat in the gallery section of Biomedica's 30th floor boardroom at One International Place Otis. Beside me, watching the numbers flash on the projection screen. 31.7% my shareholder block. 35.3% institutional investors who'd finally seen the SEC investigation reports. Together, 67%. More than enough. Gerald stood at the head of the table, in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, his face the color of old concrete. He'd tried a procedural delay motion 3 minutes earlier, something about requiring independent audit confirmation before major personnel decisions. The motion died without a second. No one at that table wanted to be associated with Gerald Ramsey anymore. The board members who'd enabled him for years, who'd looked the other way, while he stripped companies and destroyed competitors, now stared at their tablets or examined the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Anything to avoid eye contact with the man they were erasing. This is procedurally irregular, Gerald said, voice tight. I have the right to respond to allegations before... The vote has concluded, the interim board chair said. Patricia Holland, 62, who'd served as CFO before Gerald consolidated power. Her voice carried no sympathy. Security will escort you to collect personal effects. Building access will be revoked within the hour. Gerald packed his briefcase with movements that looked like violence barely contained. Legal pad, fountain pen, frame photo of his yacht. The artifacts of a career built on calculated destruction. Then he looked directly at me. You waited 25 years for this, he said. The boardroom went silent. Everyone knew who I was by now, the shareholder who'd orchestrated the revolt, the witness in 3 federal cases, the husband of the researcher Gerald had tried to erase from history. No, Gerald, I said quietly. Ida waited. I was just holding her place. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might say something else, some final accusation, some attempt to rewrite the narrative. But there was nothing left to say. The evidence didn't care about his version of events. Security arrived. 2 professionals in dark suits who'd probably escorted 100 terminated executives before Gerald. He left without another word, briefcase in hand, 25 years of power reduced to 15 minutes of shame. Otis leaned close. SEC Rule 14. A, he murmured, legal perfection. I expected vindication to feel different. Instead, watching Gerald leave that boardroom, I felt only the weight of 25 years Ida didn't get to see this. She'd died believing her research would disappear into obscurity, another brilliant mind erased by men who valued ownership over innovation. She'd been wrong, but she'd never know it. The boardroom emptied. Patricia Holland approached, extended her hand. "Mr. Barnes," she said, "the board owes you an apology. We should have investigated years ago." "Yes," I said, "you should have." She didn't flinch. "We'd like to discuss restitution options." "Talk to my attorney," I said, nodding toward Otis. "I have other work to finish." I left before she could respond. There was nothing Biomedica could offer that would matter now. 3 weeks later, January 2025, Ida's complete authentic formula went to the FDA via an investigational new drug application. MIT Medical agreed to sponsor the submission, an academic institution with the resources and credibility to shepherd the research through clinical trials properly. No shortcuts, no Stellan Lockwood cutting costs, no Gerald Ramsey filing fraudulent patents. The FDA cleared the IND within the 30-day review period. Unprecedented speed for a novel compound, but the science was sound. Ida had been meticulous. Dr. Caroline Wu arrived at my Beacon Hill apartment on a Thursday morning with a leather portfolio and the careful precision of someone who'd spent 20 years navigating academic medicine. She was 53 Korean American with silver-rimmed glasses and the direct gaze of a researcher who'd peer-reviewed 1,000 papers. MIT Medical's principal investigator for Phase 1 trials the person who would determine whether Ida's work could actually save lives or remain theoretical brilliance. We sat in the study I'd converted into a temporary office. The walls held framed family photos Ida in her lab coat Vivica as a child, Marigold's crayon drawings. Dr. Wu opened her portfolio. "I've reviewed the formula," she said. 3 times. This is serious science. Who developed this?" "Her name was Ida Barnes," I said. "She held a biochemistry degree from UMass, worked in pharmaceutical research for 15 years before terminal cancer gave her a different perspective on palliative care. She developed the compound during hospice." Dr. Wu made a note. "The mechanism is elegant. COX-2, inhibition without gastrointestinal toxicity. If the trials confirm efficacy..." "Her name goes on everything," I said. "Every paper, every publication, every label, non-negotiable." Dr. Wu looked up. "Mr. Barnes, I'm an academic. Attribution is protocol, not courtesy. Ida Barnes will be listed as the originating researcher on every document MIT Medical produces." "Without exception." "Without exception," she agreed. "Clinical trials take years. Justice took decades. But Ida's name would outlive all of us." We spent 2 hours finalizing the Phase 1 protocol. Screening would begin next month, healthy volunteers first, then controlled patient cohorts. Preliminary metrics expected in 12 to 18 months. Dr. Wu explained the statistical requirements, the safety monitoring, the regulatory checkpoints. It sounded like the opposite of what Stellan and Gerald had done, slow, methodical, accountable. "This could take 5 years to reach market," Dr. Wu said as she gathered her papers. "Maybe longer." "That's fine," I said. "Ida's been waiting 22 years. A few more won't matter." After Dr. Wu left with the signed protocols, I sat alone in the study as winter afternoon light faded to dusk. The filing cabinet in the corner held Ida's original notebooks, the ones I'd protected from Gerald, from Stellan, from everyone who saw them as intellectual property instead of legacy. I pulled out the hospice notebook pages, yellowed and fragile formulas written in Ida's precise hand during weeks when most people focused on saying goodbye. She'd focused on solving one last problem, one compound that might ease suffering for people she'd never meet. The work that would save lives began 22 years ago in a hospice room, and now it would finally get the trials and recognition she'd earned. Ida's notebook went back in the desk drawer, formulas preserved behind glass. Her legacy would unfold through clinical trials and MIT protocols. But other legacies, the kind measured in prison sentences and civil judgments, arrived first. The judicial findings came in sequence over 8 weeks, each one proportional to every choice made. Stellan Lockwood appeared in Moakley Federal Courthouse in January 2025, hands-cuffed face, showing the kind of exhaustion that comes from running and being caught. Judge Harold Brennan delivered the sentence without drama. 5 years federal prison under 18 U.S. C. Section 2511. For wiretap violations, 2 counts consecutive plus 4 years. For wire fraud and securities fraud sentences to run consecutively. Total asset forfeiture. Stellan would leave prison in 2034 with nothing but a record. I sat in the gallery with Otis. Vivica wasn't there. She'd stopped defending Stellan the day Agent Kowalski showed her the camera footage video of her own home, her own child, recorded without consent, and sold to Gerald Ramsey like surveillance product. 9 years, Otis murmured as guards led Stellan away. Gerald's trial set for 14 months out. Gerald Ramsey's indictment came next. 3 counts, conspiracy market manipulation under SEC Rule 10b-5, aiding and abetting patent infringement. His assets were frozen pending trial. The Biomedica board permanently barred him from any future position. His attorney filed for dismissal, change of venue evidence suppression, all denied. Trial scheduled for March 2026, 12 to 14 months away. Gerald would spend that time watching his empire dissolve in slow motion. I didn't attend that hearing. I'd seen enough of Gerald Ramsey. Vivica's civil settlement hearing was different. She stood before Judge Margaret Delacroix in late January, shoulders back, voice steady. When asked if she understood the terms, no criminal prosecution in exchange for full cooperation with federal investigators, civil judgment, disgorgement of $287,000 in Nature Path revenue forfeiture of all Novamed Ventures equity, permanent surrender of claims to Ida's intellectual property. $287,000, Vivica said quietly afterward, standing in the courthouse corridor. Her voice held no self-pity. Everything I made. But you're free, I said. She looked at me. Am I? I didn't answer. Freedom wasn't something a judge granted. It was something you rebuilt one choice at a time. We walked toward the parking garage in the same direction for the first time in 14 months. Not together, not reconciled, but no longer moving apart. Progress measured in parallel paths. March 2025 arrived with early spring cold and paperwork. The Brookline house sale closed on a Wednesday. I drove out one final time to walk through empty rooms before the new buyers took possession. I expected grief. Instead, standing in the garage where I'd spent 14 months after Ida's death, I felt only clarity. The house wasn't contaminated by Vivica's choices or Stellan's crimes. It was contaminated by my own silence, 14 months of choosing solitude over repair distance, over difficulty. Footsteps on the driveway. Brady appeared first, then Marigold. Both had asked to come. Wanted to say goodbye, Brady said. He was 17 now, taller voice starting to crack at unexpected moments. We walked through rooms slowly. Living room where Marigold had drawn pictures of microphones and strangers. Kitchen where Vivica had taken calls from Stellan while I listened from the hallway. Garage where I'd opened Gerald's files and planned countermoves. Marigold stopped outside Ida's old room on the 2nd floor. It was white and empty now, all trace of her grandmother erased by time and repainting. Do you miss it? Brady asked. I thought about morning coffee in the kitchen, Ida's notebook spread across the dining table, Vivica as a child running through these hallways before life taught her to choose poorly. I miss the early years, I said. I don't miss leaving it. Marigold touched the doorframe, fingers tracing wood grain, like she was reading invisible history. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We walked out together, all 3 of us. I locked the door for the final time and handed the key to the real estate agent waiting by her car. She smiled, said something about new families and fresh starts. I nodded and didn't correct her. Some places aren't meant for fresh starts. They're meant for lessons about what not to repeat. That weekend, Marigold visited the Beacon Hill apartment alone for the first time since the legal storm ended. She sat on the balcony overlooking the city, quiet in the way 16-year-olds get when they're working up to difficult questions. Are you angry at Mom? She finally asked. I thought about anger, how I'd carried it for months, how it had sharpened my focus and poisoned my sleep in equal measure. Anger costs too much, I said. It robs time you never recover. Is she sorry? And she's learning what real remorse means, I said. That's harder work and more important. Marigold nodded, picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. She's been seeing a therapist, twice a week. Good. Silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, just the space people need to let thoughts settle. I want to study biochemistry, Marigold said suddenly. Like Grandma Ida, something shifted in my chest. Marigold was 15 a year younger than Ida had been, when she decided biochemistry mattered more than anything, when she'd chosen a path that would eventually lead to hospice notebooks and compounds that might save lives. Your grandmother would be proud, I said. I went inside, opened the desk drawer, pulled out the blue leather notebook I'd bought 3 weeks earlier. Brand new empty pages, first page, inscribed in my careful handwriting, for Marigold Lockwood, who will go further than any of us. Grandpa R. I handed it to her on the balcony. She opened it, read the inscription, and clutched it to her chest like it was something precious. I won't waste it, she whispered. I know. Watching Marigold hold that blue notebook, I thought about Ida in her hospice bed 22 years earlier. She had asked me once near the end if the work would matter to someone, if all those formulas and theories and late nights would amount to anything beyond yellowed pages in a desk drawer. I'd promised it would. Now Marigold held that promise. A 16-year-old girl who'd watched her family nearly destroy itself, who'd drawn pictures of hidden microphones, and asked hard questions, who'd chosen to study the same science her grandmother had loved. And somewhere I let myself believe this Ida could see it. I think she always could see us. 3 weeks after Marigold left the balcony with that blue notebook, I stood at another beginning. The microphone at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center auditorium stood exactly where Ida had volunteered 20 years earlier, and my hands shook touching it. Friday afternoon, January 2025, and the room held 200 people who'd come to hear about something that started in a hospice bed and ended with medicine that might actually save lives. Otis sat in the front row beside Dr. Caroline Wu. Marigold and Brady sat 3 rows back. Vivica stood at the rear exit, half hidden, like she wasn't sure she belonged. Behind me, projected on a screen 15 feet tall, Ida's photograph from 2019, her last good year. Lab coat knowing, smile, eyes that saw through pretense. I cleared my throat. The room quieted. Ida's Promise Foundation launches today. I said, non-profit. Mission distribute Ida's formula. Free to uninsured terminal patients after FDA. Approval projected late 2025. I explained the structure. Initial endowment, $5.2 million. Biomedica settlement plus proceeds from the Brookline house sale. Money that came from vengeance transformed into healing. Irrevocable trust structure, no board could dissolve it, no future administration could redirect funds. Ida's work would reach people who couldn't afford it, which is exactly what she would have wanted. Official medicine name, I said, voice catching. Ida's formula, her name on every document, forever. Movement in the audience. An elderly woman stood 70s white hair scrubs, suggesting she still worked bedside. Her voice carried across the auditorium. I'm Eleanor Price, she said. Hospice nurse here for 43 years. I knew Ida Barnes. The room went silent. We called her the lady who stayed, Eleanor continued. Most volunteers come once, maybe twice. Ida came every week for 6 years. She sat with people nobody else would sit with, the difficult cases, the ones who screamed or forgot their own names or died slowly without family. Eleanor's voice broke. Whatever she made, it came from every one of those rooms, from every person she stayed beside. I stood frozen staring at that photograph projected behind me while the room erupted in applause. Otis found me afterward in the hallway, handed me a bottle of water I didn't remember needing. $5.2 million, he said quietly. From vengeance to healing. Ida would approve. I hope so, I said. I know so. Ida never saw FDA approval or Phase 1 trials or foundation auditoriums. She saw hospice rooms and believed formulas mattered anyway. That kind of faith without evidence, without guarantee, I'd spent 30 years trying to understand it. Now, I carried it forward because she couldn't. The following Tuesday, I brought Brady to Fraser and Whitfield Trust on Commonwealth Avenue. Mahogany walls, leather chairs, the kind of office that whispered old money and careful planning. The trust officer, a man named Douglas Harper, who'd managed Ida's accounts for 2 decades, laid out documents with the precision of someone explaining sacred text. Irrevocable trust established October 2018. Douglas said, Grantor Ida Marie Barnes, beneficiaries Brady Lockwood and Marigold Lockwood, current balance $340,000. Brady stared at the number on the page. Milestone distributions beginning age 18. Douglas continued. Education and housing expenses only, ages 18 through 25. Trustee with sole discretionary authority, Raymond Barnes. He looked at me. No outside party, including the beneficiary's mother, can access or liquidate principal. Brady's voice came out small. Grandma did this in 2018. She did, I said. But that was... He stopped calculating. That was before any of this happened. She knew, I said quietly. Maybe not the details, but she knew exactly what needed to be done. Brady sat back in the leather chair, processing. 6 months until his 18th birthday. 6 months until he'd have access to education's funding that Stellan couldn't steal and Vivica couldn't mismanage and Gerald couldn't touch. "I want to study biochemistry," Brady said suddenly. "Like Marigold said, like Grandma." Something in my chest expanded. 2 grandchildren, 2 blue notebooks, 2 paths forward. That would be, I said carefully, the greatest news she ever heard. Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock, my apartment doorbell rang. Vivica stood in the hallway holding a small box tied with ribbon. No flowers, no grand gesture, just the box and an expression I'd never seen on her face before, something past shame deeper than regret. "I found this packing the Brookline house," she said. "It belongs with you." Inside, Ida's original wedding ring. Simple gold band scratched from 34 years of wear. 34 years she wore it. 14 months, I forgot what it meant. I held the ring, turning it in the hallway light. "I know a simple sorry can't fix what I broke," Vivica said. Her voice was steady. No tears, no manipulation, just fact. "But I am truly sorry." I looked at my daughter, not through the lens of betrayal anymore, not through strategy or chess moves. Just a man watching a family member try to grow. "I know you are," I said. "I can see it. The therapist says I'm—" She stopped, reconsidered. "I'm working on it, twice a week, understanding why I choose poorly." "Good." Silence stretched between us. Not comfortable, but honest. "Is there anything left?" Vivica asked. "Between us?" I thought about 37 years of marriage to Ida, raising a daughter who became someone I didn't recognize, 14 months in a garage choosing isolation. I thought about Marigold's questions and Brady's trust fund, and Eleanor Price remembering the lady who stayed. "Yes," I said. "Not clean or easy, but real. That's what family means." Vivica nodded. She didn't ask to come inside. I didn't invite her. We stood in that threshold space, daughter and father, broken and rebuilding, and for today that was enough. After she left, I walked back to my desk and placed Ida's ring beside the blue notebook I'd inscribed for Marigold. Original beside future, loss beside legacy. Outside, Boston Harbor, lights reflected off winter water, constant and indifferent. The city moved forward. The foundation would distribute medicine. The trials would conclude. Brady and Marigold would study biochemistry and either succeed or fail, or find some middle path I couldn't predict. Forward now. No dramatic transformation, no perfect closure. Just quiet movement one day after another, carrying what Ida built into whatever came next. The future arrived quietly the way most important things do. I'm wearing Ida's gray wool sweater on the balcony this January morning, the one Vivica called embarrassing at the Four Seasons Gala. And I've never felt warmer. The Charles River moves below, indifferent and constant. My tea Earl Grey, the way Ida made it with honey instead of sugar steams in the cold air. Gulls circle over the water, looking for breakfast. 8 months since I sold the Brookline house. 2 years since the doorbell rang, and everything I thought I'd buried came back to life. The sweater still smells faintly of Ida's lavender sachets, even after all this time. I found it in a box marked donations that never made it to Goodwill. Vivica had looked at it during the Four Seasons Gala, like it was evidence of my irrelevance, this threadbare gray thing among men in Hugo Boss and Italian leather. She'd been wrong about the sweater. She'd been wrong about a lot of things. So had I. Vivica calls every other Sunday now. Cambridge apartment marketing job at a medical devices startup salary that barely covers rent, but it's honest work and she earned it herself. We don't talk long, 20 minutes, maybe 30. She tells me about Marigold's chemistry grades and Brady's college applications. I tell her about the foundation's progress and Dr. Wu's latest trial updates. We don't talk about Stellan or Gerald or the 14 months I spent in that garage. Some wounds close better if you stop examining them. "I'm proud of you," I told her 3 Sundays ago. She'd gone quiet for a long moment. Then, "Thank you. That matters." It was enough. Brady's applying to UMass Amherst, Ida's alma mater, biochemistry program. His essay he sent me a draft, opened with a line about his grandmother developing medicine in a hospice bed, while most people were making peace with death. The admissions committee will either love it or find it too raw. Either way, Ida would have cried reading it. Marigold logs entries in her blue notebook every week. She sends me photos sometimes, chemical structures, hypothesis, notes, questions about enzyme inhibition that I forward to Dr. Wu because I'm a chemist, not a biochemist, and there's a difference. Marigold understands that difference now. She's 16 and already thinking like a researcher. Otis retired in December, sent him a bottle of 25-year scotch with a note. For the man who proved evidence matters more than eloquence. He called to say the scotch was too expensive and he'd already drunk half of it. We meet for lunch once a month at a pub near Faneuil Hall. We don't talk about the case. We talk about his granddaughter's softball team and whether the Red Sox will ever rebuild their pitching rotation. Normal things. The kind of friendship built after the crisis ends. 2 years ago, a doorbell rang and my daughter stood there with a business plan stolen from my dead wife's research. I thought that was the beginning. It wasn't. It was the middle. The beginning was 37 years earlier when Ida and I got married and promised to build something that mattered. The beginning was every morning she woke up and chose to stay curious about compounds and reactions, and whether suffering could be reduced by rearranging molecules. The ending hasn't arrived yet. Maybe it never does. Dr. Caroline Wu called yesterday afternoon. Her voice had the particular excitement scientists get when data exceeds expectations. Phase 1 results are strong, she said. Very strong. We're seeing consistent COX-2 inhibition without the gastric complications. Preliminary metrics suggest we can move to Phase 2 by spring. That's good, I said. There's more. She paused. We had a compassionate use case. 71-year-old man in Worcester pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Pain management failing. We got emergency approval to try Ida's formula. I waited. He called this morning, Dr. Wu said quietly. First pain-free night in 8 months. He said he slept 6 hours straight. His daughter cried on the phone with our nurse coordinator. I'd stood at the window overlooking the harbor, phone pressed to my ear, thinking about Ida in that hospice bed with her notebooks, thinking about all the people she'd sat beside who died in pain, thinking about the one thing she wanted to fix. Thank you for telling me, I'd said. Her name is on everything, Dr. Wu said. Every document, every trial, result, every publication. Ida Barnes. People will remember. After we hung up, I'd pulled out Ida's wedding ring from the desk drawer and held it for a long time. 34 years she wore it. Now it sits in a small frame on my bookshelf beside her photograph, the one from 2019, where she's smiling like she knows a secret. Maybe she did. You want to know if I forgave Vivica? I don't think forgiveness works like light switches on or off dark or light. I think it works like physical therapy after an injury. Slow repetitions, small improvements, some days better than others. We're learning, both of us. A boat passes below on the river, small motorboat man, at the wheel young girl beside him, bundled in a purple coat. The girl waves up at the buildings. I wave back. She probably can't see me, but I wave anyway. The tea is cooling, the sweater is warm, the gulls are still circling. I spent 32 years engineering precision compounds for pharmaceutical companies. I spent 2 years engineering precision justice for the people who tried to erase Ida's work. Both required the same methodology: identify the problem, isolate variables, test solutions, document results. But sitting here now, I realized the most important work wasn't engineering at all. It was remembering. Remembering who Ida was before the cancer, before the hospice, before she became a story people told about noble suffering. Remembering she was brilliant and funny and stubborn and real. Remembering her gray wool sweater and Earl Grey tea with honey, and the way she'd stay up past midnight working on formulas because the problem mattered more than sleep. They said she just mixed some plants together, amateurs playing chemist, dangerous and unproven. Last week, her formula gave a dying man in Worcester his first pain-free night in 8 months. His daughter cried with relief. Dr. Wu's Phase 1 trials are exceeding expectations. Brady's writing college essays about his grandmother's legacy. Marigold's filling blue notebook pages with chemical structures. The foundation will distribute medicine free to people who can't afford it. I'm wearing her sweater. The river is moving. The tea is warm. I have nowhere I need to be and everywhere I want to go. That is enough. That is, as it turns out, everything. And to you listening to my story, remember this: patience isn't weakness, and silence isn't surrender. For 14 months after Ida died, I chose isolation over connection. I let grief build walls instead of bridges. Don't make that mistake. When someone you love passes, protect their legacy. Yes, but don't lose yourself in the process. I almost forgot that family, even broken family, deserves a chance to heal. Almost. What I learned is this revenge isn't about destroying someone. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, is protecting what they tried to take and making it matter more than their theft ever could. When my daughter tried to profit from Ida's dying work, I could have responded with rage. Instead, I responded with precision. I believe God's timing is always perfect. He gave me the patience to wait, the clarity to plan, and the strength to see it through. That's what a dad's family revenge looks like, not destruction, but justice that heals. If this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment below. Tell me, would you have handled this dad's family revenge differently? Do you think I did the right thing with Vivica? And if you know someone who needs to hear about how a dad's family revenge can be about healing, not just hurt, please share it with them. If you'd like more stories, subscribe to Dad's Calm Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. One final note, while the heart of this story is real, some details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. What I hope you take away is the message that patience, precision, and protecting what matters can transform even the deepest betrayal into something meaningful.